The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing? This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and I'm welcoming you tonight to another live stream, live reading. We are continuing with the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy by Ioan Ratiu, or Ian Ratiu, or Juan Ratiu. I don't know. I have no idea how to pronounce his first name, but his last name I'm pretty sure is Ratiu, and he's written an epic book, and it's taking us... We're going through it at a reasonable pace, and we're still about halfway. No, we're a bit over halfway now. And we're in the middle of chapter 6, which is all about the EU. And it's taken us 2 3-hour live streams to get as far as we have through the chapter. And tonight we're going to finish off the final 30 pages of this chapter, hopefully, if all goes according to plan. So thank you for being here if you're tuning in live. If you're tuning in on the replay, remember, there's a pinned comment underneath the video with timestamps that you can use to jump ahead to the relevant section of the video that you are most interested in. But for those of you tuning in live on Rumble, YouTube, and Odyssey, I hope you are staying warm. It's quite frosty in my part of the world at the minute. We've had snow for the last couple of days. It's been slippery out there, but it's also been nice and crisp. The air it has that wintry cold freshness to it that I quite like. But I like it most when I have central heating that works and big warm fleecy jackets on, and I can go inside and keep my body temperature up. That is much more preferred as well. But I hope you're all doing well. And on YouTube, we've got Frank, Celine Lyon, Johnny, LJ, Elizabeth, and Timmy. I hope you're all doing well. And I'm very grateful for you all being here and tuning in. It's pretty quiet over on Odyssey, but we got Turbs and Heidi over on Rumble. I hope you're all doing well. Turbs says, love this book. I am also in agreement. This book is certainly an eye-opening account of how we got to where we are in the world. He's dispelling a lot of myths regarding certain institutions and organizations. He's also really pulling back the curtain and showing us where the centers of power really lie, with in-depth, detailed descriptions of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, with a whole chapter discussing that. There was a whole chapter on the Council on Foreign Relations as well. There was also a whole chapter on the Fabian Society, and it is this author's contention that the Lord Milner Roundtable, Cecil Rhodes Group, have been working hand in glove, maybe not hand in glove, but maybe hand in hand with the Fabian Society to bring about the world that we are now living in. And he paints a compelling picture. We've had a look and checked out some of his references and the footnotes, and he's pretty much on point. I have some of the books that he refers to. We've been diving into them and looking up the page number and finding that the things he quotes are indeed in those books. For example, he quotes heavily from David Rockefeller's book Memoirs, in which David Rockefeller talks about how when he studied at the London School of Economics, which was a Fabian creation, David Rockefeller wrote his thesis on Fabian socialism. Also, Ioan Ratiu has talked to us about how the UN over on the east coast of America was built on land donated by the Rockefeller family. And in fact, it used to be one of the country's or the area's largest abattoirs. So that tells you quite a lot as well. But this book indeed is a fantastic tour de force, and it dovetails beautifully with other books that we have read on this channel. And so if once we get to the end of this one, you are hungry for more and you want to broaden and deepen your understanding of these topics, then you can have a look on the playlists tab on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey, and you can see some of the books that we've previously covered. Word of warning, most of my replays and playlists are on YouTube, but Rumble and Odyssey has, I think, 4 books on there. I haven't yet uploaded everything to everywhere. It's a big job that I don't have time for because I'm kind of busy, but they're on YouTube and you can check them out there. I would recommend G. Edward Griffin's The Fearful Master and also Rose Martin's Fabian Freeway. Those 2 books complement this one wonderfully and go together really well. So if you want to avail yourself of a free education that you're not going to get in the schools or the universities, you might get it in London School of Economics. Perhaps they give out the truth there. I'm not sure. I'm not the kind of person who would ever get into such a establishment, mainly because I'm English. You would think the London School of Economics might be there to uplift the education and empower the people of England, but oh no, 70 to 80% of the LSE's intake are from overseas. What that institution actually does is it grooms and it mentors and it puts the right programming into the people who are going to become the leaders of other countries, and then it sends them back out there. So it's all about tightening those relationships, those international relationships, and putting the right people in place so that, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other researchers and writers such as Ratiu, this is all being done towards to bring us towards a more complete, all-encompassing one world system of some description. Now, I kind of argue in previous videos that we're largely sort of already there in many ways. You know, financial systems, the dress, the types of clothes that people wear, the sort of food that is readily available all over the world, the kind of entertainment people engage in, the sort of technologies that people use, the internet, just that one thing on its own, is telling us that we are on the edge, on the verge, on the advent of some sort of one world system. What are they going to do with it? What's it going to look like? We don't know just yet, but reading these books gives us an idea into their mindset, the people who are doing this, into their values, into the way they feel that they are superior and that they are here to manage the rest of us. These are bureaucrats. These are psychopaths. These are the kind of people that don't want to work and contribute and create and add something useful to society and make a product to benefit the lives of the people around them or provide a service and to be of service to their fellow humans. No. They want to sit back and manage the rest of us, right? That's what they see themselves as. These are bureaucrats. These are managers. These are people who do not want to get dirt under their fingernails. They don't want to break a sweat. They obviously think their sweat is too precious to be used in, doing a hard day's work. And so they want to devise systems and, systems and, let me think, what's the word I'm looking for? Organizations, rules, methodologies, processes that we all have to abide by, even though we don't want to. We didn't vote for them. We didn't tell them that we would like them to do this for us. They've taken it upon themselves to manage things and design the perfect scientifically controlled society and to usher us all into it using a variety of horrible techniques, which I discuss in other places, actually. And actually, so I'll just mention before we get into tonight's preamble ramble that last night I just wrapped the second part of my conversation with Melissa of Cutting Through the Matrix. We have discussed Animal Farm, then we discussed Brave New World, and we have just finished discussing Brave New World Revisited. And it's a 150-page book, but it took us 5 hours to mine all the nuggets out of that book and give our own thoughts and reactions and flesh it out with some other context. We just wrapped the second part of our Brave New World Revisited discussion last night. That's going to go live sometime soon, I think today, hopefully. And that's on Alan Watt CTTM here on YouTube. You can find it on cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You can also go to Telegram, where there is a wonderful, lively book club full of interesting people sharing resources and insights and asking wonderful questions. And we don't always all agree on everything, But this is what it's all about: asking questions, being curious, and helping uplift each other's understanding and knowledge of the ways of the world and the way things are going. And that's a really good place. And I hang out in there pretty much daily, and there's always something interesting going on in that. That's on Telegram. So if you're looking for a discussion of the methodologies, the tactics, the ways that the elite, the world controllers, I should say, I'm trying to stop using the word elite, the world controllers are using methods and tactics to control us individuals and to control us groups and societies. If you want to know more about that, then Brave New World Revisited is a really good place to start. And if you can't get a hold of the book, or you don't want to read the book for any reason, then you can check out my conversation with Melissa. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be a very good one. I just see as well, we've got Faithis also on Rumble. Good to have you here. So preamble ramble tonight, and then we'll get into the book and finish off this chapter. Let's go. So the first thing I thought we would look at is spend a little more time on the Wikipedia page for the European Union. This is a massive page, and I've highlighted a few things on it before, but seeing as we're wrapping up this chapter about the EU, and it's the longest chapter in the book by a long shot, let's have a little look at the context provided to us by the kind, wonderful, generous, objective, honest, reliable people who run Wikipedia. So the European Union, it's a supranational political and economic union of 27 member states. It's often been described as a sui generis political entity combining the characteristics of both a federation and a confederation. It contains 5.8 of the world's population, or it did at least in 2020. Might have gone up a little bit since then. It constitutes 1/6 of global nominal GDF. So that's quite wild, isn't it? For only, that kind of makes sense. 6% of the world population, and 1/6. Sorry, that's quite a bit higher than the population. So the contribution to the global GDF is pretty high for the amount of people who are in the EU. The cornerstone of the EU is the customs union, which paved the way to establishing an internal single market based on standardized legal framework and legislation. And I think this is sort of what is planned for the world. I think they want the whole world pretty much to be a single market that is standardized with one centralized authority passing out the laws and the legislation that will control things. Now, I didn't notice this until right before I went live, but the EU has a motto, and that motto is united in diversity. And this gave me a little chuckle because I've been saying in a few different places the phrase, the snappy little saying, diversity is unity. And it's kind of a play on the Orwell quote, ignorance is strength, freedom is slavery. And I thought another one that fits that is diversity is unity. This is kind of what we're told, that the more people from different cultures who speak different languages, who have different sets of values and different religions, the more of those you can cram into one place, the better. And that's going to make for a strong population who are united in their common humanity. And I was making that joke that diversity is unity. And then it turns out that the European Union beat me to it. And they've been making that joke for much longer. So I swear that I didn't plagiarize from the European Union. I honestly thought I'd come up with that myself. And so any royalties that I receive for that joke, I will be certain to register with the single market system in the EU. Oh, what am I saying? I'm in England. We left the EU. Screw you guys. I'm going to keep the royalties. You're not having it. But yeah, they do say that. United in diversity. Wonderful little piece of Orwellian doublethink right there on the face of it. So moving on and learning a little more about the EU. It maintains permanent diplomatic missions throughout the world, and it represents itself at the United Nations and the World Trade Organization and the G7 and the G20. Due to its global influence, the European Union has been described by some scholars as an emerging superpower. It says it was established in 1993 and it was incorporated as an international legal juridical person. I highlighted that last bit in a different color because I think it is very important. People don't think of countries and governments and royal families and supranational economic unions. They don't think of them as corporations, but legally speaking, these are corporations. And it's very important to I mean, I don't have a deep understanding of this, but it's important to be aware that the EU is not some magical, mystical covenant created between the people who've joined it. No, it's a corporation. It was incorporated in 1993. It's a juridical person. What is a juridical person, you might ask? Great question. Glad you asked it, because I didn't know either. So I opened up a tab over here to have a look at it. So a juridical person is a legal person that is not a natural person, but an organization recognized by law as a fictitious person, such as a corporation, government agency, NGO, or international organization. And it gives the example here of the European Union. So did you know the European Union is a person? It's quite interesting, isn't it? The European Union is a person in the eyes of the law. It's a fictional person, but it is a person. It starts to make you ask questions like, what does the word person mean? Because quite clearly the European Union is not a person as you or I are people. You know, the people who live in the house next door, or the people that I go to work with, or the person who drove the bus that I rode into town earlier today. These are what we think of as people, as persons. But then the EU is also a person? That's interesting, isn't it? This Wikipedia article says, other terms include artificial person, corporate person, judicial person, juridical entity, juridic person, juristic person. A juridical person maintains certain duties and rights as enumerated under relevant laws. The rights and responsibilities of a juridical person are distinct from those of the natural persons constituting it. So very curious, very interesting. And this is a little insight into the sort of trickery and the wordplay that is contained within law and the world of what is legal and how laws are created, and how there's a different language and a different system of defining and describing things when you're speaking about law. And when you're in a courtroom, for example, there's a whole different language and a set of meaning ascribed to words that you might think you know and think you understand, such as person. You know, if you ask somebody what's a person, they're going to say, well, I'm a person, you're a person, it's a human being. It's somebody with consciousness, personality, you know, moving around and doing human things of some description. Most likely people are going to say that. And then you're going to say, oh, do you know that the EU is a person? Well, what? I know it's many people, many persons altogether. No. The EU is a person. So that's just a kind of scratching, very, very lightly scratching the surface, hardly even scratching the surface of how tricky language can be and how important it is to at least get some awareness that double meanings and triple meanings are used against us all the time, every day. But there's a little bit of history on this page that I thought was quite interesting. It says, since the beginning of writing at the start of recorded history, associations have been known as the original form of juridical person. So associations, groups of human beings can form an association, and that is known as a juridical person. And this is documented for the 1st century AD for Jewish trading companies. So since the beginning of writing, juridical persons have existed, and it started with Jewish trading companies. And then it says as well, in Roman law, entities gained significance through institutions such as the state, communities, corporations, and their associations of persons and assets, as well as associations. And it says here, at least 3 persons were required in Rome to found an association. So it's kind of wordy and tricky and confusing, but not being aware of these things puts you at a distinct disadvantage. And it goes back, and these systems and these things have been used for quite a long time, you know, at least 2,000 years at this point. But let's hop back over to the EU page and continue learning. So the EU's beginnings can be traced to the inner 6 states, which were Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. At the start of modern European integration in 1948, and to the Western Union, the International Authority for the Ruhr, the European Coal and Steel Community, the European Economic Community, and the European Atomic Energy Community. These were all established by treaties. Very important word, very critical to understanding the EU and what it is and how it works and how it functions, right? And then in 2012, the EU was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's another thing that juridical persons can do. They can be awarded prizes. I don't know who gets to keep the trophy. I don't know who gets to take home the certificate and put it in a nice wooden frame and hang it on their wall. But the EU has been given a prize. So well done to EU. The history I covered a little bit on a previous video. And the bit that stood out was that John Maynard Keynes proposed a European customs union for the struggling post-war European economies. Now, if you remember just a little bit further up, we just read that the cornerstone of the EU is the customs union. And it was John Maynard Keynes who proposed this European customs union. We've talked a little bit about Keynes before, especially in relation to the Fabian Freeway book and how close he was to the Fabian society. And let's just refresh ourselves that what was the massive innovation that John Maynard Keynes came up with? Well, it was his radical idea that governments should spend money they don't have. Yes. So Times Magazine called him one of the most important people of the century for this incredible, fantastic, amazing, wonderful, innovative, genius idea of let's get everybody into debt and enslave them with debt that they can never get out of to ensure that they never own anything themselves and they can own nothing and be happy. We've got John Maynard Keynes to thank for that. So it's important to know that he was involved in the creation and the proposition of this European Customs Union, which is the cornerstone of the EU. It's also important to know that Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi was one of the first people to be involved in pushing European integration, and he formed the Pan-European Union back in the 20s, so before World War II even. And he also founded the European Parliamentary Union. And for reference, there's a book about him called Hitler's Cosmopolitan Bastard, which I just like saying it because it's a fantastic title of the book. That's available, freely available, not free, but you got to pay for it, but it's easily available is what I should say. Then came the Second World War, and during this war, the question of the Wikipedia article says the question of what to fight against and what for had to be agreed on, and it just gave me a chuckle because it just had me imagining all of the upper crust, the diplomats, the royalty, the politicians sitting around the table going, right, we need to have a war, right? So who's going to fight who? And then them just deciding, okay, you fight him over there and you fight that one over there. And what we're going to tell everyone it's about? Oh, we'll tell them it's about freedom. And it's about, and it just drummed up this image of this ridiculous scenario of cooperation at the very highest levels, planning out the conflict, planning what they're going to tell people, almost like wargaming the situation before they brought it into reality. Kind of a bit like they did with Event 201, wargaming out the scenarios, planning what kind of propaganda and messaging you're going to use to drum up public support, to get the public enraged against the enemy. This is all planned ahead of time, and this little sentence here just kind of lets that slip, or at least hints at it. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but that's how I read it. Then, moving on, by the end of the war, European integration became seen as an antidote to the extreme nationalism that had caused the war. Yes, the war was started by extreme nationalism, and if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you, and a lot of books that you should read, because that is a gross, misleading, and completely ridiculous oversimplification of what caused the war. But the history section on this Wikipedia article is massive, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I wanted to go down to this bit, which is about law and primary law and how law works in European law. So there's a whole separate article on it, which is probably massive, but we'll just get a little bit of an overview here. So in the European Union law, how does it work? Well, constitutionally, the EU bears some resemblance to both a confederation and a federation, but has not formally defined itself as either because it does not have a formal constitution. Its status is defined by the treaty, there's the word again, of European Union, and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So it's really all defined and dictated by what is written in these treaties. And the question then is, who wrote the treaties and who decided what got to go in there, and were we all availed of the contents of these treaties ahead of time and allowed to pass our eyes over them and give our input? I say our as though my country is a member of the EU. It's not anymore. But those of you out there who are in the EU, have you read these treaties? Were they published and made available to everybody who they were going to affect ahead of time? Was it a fully transparent, accountable, and democratic process to get these treaties written and signed off and agreed upon? Questions worth asking. And then the Wikipedia article goes on to tell us that sovereignty continues to flow from the bottom up. And that really gave me a good chuckle. The idea that the people at the bottom of the European Union, i.e. the men and women and children who live in the countries that have been incorporated into the EU, have sovereignty, and that's what lends the EU its legitimacy, is an absolute rib tickler as far as I'm concerned. There's a bit here about primary law. So it tells you the European Union is based on a series of treaties. These first established the European Community and the EU, and then made amendments to those founding treaties. So treaties are fantastic because you can, once you've got them in and signed off and agreed upon, then you can change them after the fact with amendments. Just like the way governments and politicians change laws, just like any time any law is proposed and people think it's some sort of victory or it's a really great thing that we've got this, well, you can just change it further down the line. You can just amend it. You can strike it off the record. You can replace it with a new bit of legislation. And this is the problem with man-made law and man-made anything, is that there's no reason to be beholden to it. And it can be changed just according to the whims and the will of the people who created it in the first place. So it's the same thing here with the EU. It's bound by treaties, but those treaties themselves are open to amendments and changing and alteration later on. It does tell us here, though, that the EU has legal personality with the right to sign agreements and international treaties. So that's one of the things that juridical, what was that word again? Juridical, that's it. Juridical person. You get to sign agreements and international treaties. So it's a very strange system of fiction, meaning made up, artificial, meaning made by man. No root or foundation in nature, no root or foundation in creation as it has been designed. Nothing that is supernatural. This is all man-made stuff, and if it's man-made, it can be unmade by man, right? It can be changed, altered. There's no reason for it to be fixed or obeyed or followed, apart from the fact that the people with the guns tell you that it's for your own good, that you must follow it and obey it. So that's a little insight into the EU. This is a huge article, and there's plenty more to learn. But I just thought I would give you a little whistle-stop tour there and tell you all about it. So apparently there's a bunch more of countries that are looking to join the EU as well. Candidate countries. And kind of like the UN, which has almost got every country in the world signed up to it, the EU is growing. The leaders, so-called leaders of countries, are very interested in joining this wonderful system of spending money that you don't have. And I think it's kind of obvious that this largely benefits the people sitting at the top of the pyramids, the pyramid being the nation state. I'm not sure what the benefits of the EU are. If you're in a country that you feel has benefited greatly from being part of the EU, I would be very grateful to hear from you and learn more about it, because I don't know everything. I'm just sort of casting my eyes over articles and websites and books and giving you my thoughts as they occur. So that's the EU. And as I mentioned in a previous video, what's curiously lacking on this page is a list of the criticisms of the EU. On the UN page here on Wikipedia, we have a whole section on criticisms of the UN, and that is just simply not at all here. Instead, it's just telling us how these things work, giving us the good stuff, and really not giving us any of the bad stuff. But if you are interested in some of the bad stuff, I did get this the other day, which was fairly easy to get hold of. I found it on Amazon. It was fairly cheap. It's a book called The Great Deception by Christopher Booker and Richard North, and this is the secret history of the European Union. I thought it would be a good one to grab hold of, seeing as the Milner-Fabian conspiracy is giving us an insight into it. As I've said before on the channel, one of the things that I really like is when you have a book and the footnotes are at the bottom of the page, the same page. That makes reading and researching so much easier because you're not flipping to the back all the time. But as you can see, this book has quite small writing, and pretty much every single page has some sort of footnotes at the bottom. So I'm very interested in reading this one and learning more about the secret history of the European Union and seeing if this book kind of dovetails with what we're learning from Ioan Ratiu. So that's all I've got from Wikipedia. But it's not all I've got for the preamble ramble. I do have a little bit more to tell you about. So something that I was enjoying very much recently was this episode of Geopolitics and Empire with a gentleman called Peter Duke. Now, this is a 2-hour chat, and it's one of the highest viewed videos on Geopolitics and Empire in the last month. It's got 2.7 thousand views, which, the numbers on YouTube are pretty much all cooked. But there's a good reason, and I shared this in my Telegram group, and I thought it was an excellent discussion because Peter Duke is a very well-spoken man, got great attention to detail, and he did a whole presentation here, right, where he's talking about Doge, D-O-G-E, Doge, which some people might know as a cryptocurrency. Other people know it as an internet meme, and then other people who are maybe a little more historically minded might be aware that it is the name of a sort of class of kind of Venetian nobility. And Peter Duke gives this whole presentation here, talks about, and then, more recently, he talks about how this is the Department of Government Efficiency, which apparently Elon Musk is going to run at the behest of the Orange Man Bad. And so Doge, what does it mean? Where does it come from? Quite interesting dive into that. Who popped up in this discussion? We got Colonel Mandel House. He pops up. Smedley Butler and his book War is a Racket. And then all these examples of this cap, this hat, which is the hat worn by the Doge, and how there are many, many examples of insignias and flags which contain this cap, which is also known as a Phrygian cap as well. Okay, so here's an example. It's associated with this old poster, Young America, and there's many examples of seals. This is the Department of the Army. It's got a Phrygian cap there on a stick. So he paints a very intriguing picture, and then he brings us in a roundabout way to this picture of the world. And he talks about a word that was new to me, that I'd never heard before, but I designated it my word of the month. And that word is thalassocracy. So what's a thalassocracy? So a thalassocracy is dominion of the seas. It's naval supremacy. So interesting, right? I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but I hadn't. And I thought that was curious because he's talking about how the world is a thalassocracy. And the same people are sitting at the top of this system as have sat at the top of it for many, many years, as shown by this historical use of the Doge, the cap, the symbol of the red hat here that you can see. That's a symbol for the version of it that's used in Switzerland, for a group in Switzerland. The oldest example he finds is one that goes back to, I think, 100 AD. And his contention is that this, the idea is that if you can control this outer ring of the sea, then you can maintain your hegemony of power. And the only thing that would threaten it would be if this inner area got its ished together and coordinated, and then was connected, and then it could sort of blossom outwards. And so part of it would have to be that if you can maintain chaos in this middle area here and keep control of this outer ring, then you can keep control indefinitely. It's a really interesting idea, and you're probably wondering how this links to anything that I've said in this intro so far. But it does, because if we go back to juridical person, it reminded me of one of the things that I learned about when I was locked down by my government. And I was told I wasn't allowed to go anywhere or see anybody or hug people or shake their hands or breathe without some sort of interference device strapped to my face. And I started learning about law a little bit, about something called common law. And common law can roughly be described as the law of the land. And it stands in opposition to maritime law. And maritime law, as you would imagine, is the law of the seas. So apparently there's different systems of law. One relates to living men and women on the land, and I use those words very carefully. And the other one relates to vessels and captains of those vessels and the lost souls who are presumed missing and dead at sea. Okay? And there's been, and it's a really fascinating thing to learn about, there's been a sort of mixing up and deliberate confusing, convoluting of what law is referring to. And this is why language is so important. And it reminded me when I was looking at how the EU is a juridical person or a artificial person or a corporate person. It reminded me that we shouldn't really describe ourselves as persons, because this is a legal term. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a term which belongs more to this sort of maritime system of law. Whereas if you are using the common law system, then you will refer to the men and the women, the living men and the living women who are on the land, not lost at sea, not the missing dead souls who are lost at sea and therefore can be dealt with accordingly. But a living man and a living woman on the land under common law is a very different jurisdiction than the one set up in and described as maritime law. So I've done a very kind of clumsy way of describing that, and because, as I say, I'm by no means an expert, but there's something to all this that is very interesting and worth diving into and knowing about. And I know some people have good resources on this, but this whole discussion here about the control of the seas was very interesting, and I would recommend anybody to go and check out this interview with Peter Duke. It's called Who Rules the World and the Secret Meaning Behind Doge. He has some very interesting takes on what's going on, why things are the way they are, and I would think very compelling and very interesting. He's very well spoken. And so I thought I would check out a little bit more about Peter Duke. Oh, just a little bit more, sorry, while we're on thalassocracy, which is the new concept that you might want to bear in mind when thinking about the world and how it works and why it is the way it is. Thalassocracy does not have an entry on Etymology Online, nor does it have an entry in the Cambridge Dictionary. There's kakistocracy and aristocracy, but there is no thalassocracy. Does, however, have an entry on dictionary.com. And it just says dominion over the seas, as in exploration, trade, or colonization. So that's your new word of the day. And the difference between common law of the land and maritime law of the sea is your homework and a thread to start pulling on. But Peter Duke and that interview, I just wanted to give a shout out to his excellent website, which I had a look at. He's built a news aggregator. So if you're tired of censorship and not being able to find the good information and things getting buried and shadow banning and all this nonsense, you can come here and you can check out his news aggregator where he gives you everything. He's got so much stuff on here. He's got Grand Theft World. He's got the Corbett Report. He's got Last American Vagabond. Matthew Errett of Canadian Patriot. David Knight, Courtney Turner, Mark Dice, Activist Post. So it's a real good Neil Oliver, a really good widespread Truth Stream Media's on here as well. Survey of the alt media land. It's a one-stop shop. And I think it's really excellent that he's put this together. So you can go to the sources page. And here you can see for investigative journalism, you've got Charlie Robinson's work, Aaron Mate. It's amazing that he's brought all this together in one place. So if you're kind of stuck in your usual routines of where you're getting information from, and you're looking for other sources to balance things out, then you can come here to the Duke Report. And I will chuck a link to this in the chat in a moment. Before I do, I want to give an honorable mention to this tab up here. If you go to this tab, books, oh boy, are you in for a treat if you love books like I do. So the book list is massive, right? If you go right here underneath the book series, he's got 100 essential reading. So 100 books that he considers to be essential reading. He's got them lists divided up according to topics as well. So 9/11, Tiny Mustache Man, banking, Christianity, espionage, Fabian socialism. All right, let's have a look at Fabian socialism. There it is. Boom. Top of the list. Milner-Fabian conspiracy. All right. So Peter Duke is tuned in, switched on. He's paying attention. And I think he's doing a really fantastic job with this website. What else? Fabian Freeway by Rose Martin. There you are. Top 2 books on Fabian socialism. We've read them both on this channel. This one we've got to get hold of and read because Jason Horsley is alive and kicking and doing work and holding Twitter spaces, and we might be able to talk to him one time as well. We've also got Industrial Democracy, so that's a Beatrice and Sidney Webb book, and on and on and on, right? Excellent resource. We've got on the right here a whole bunch of authors. So yeah, you've got the topics. Oh, okay, hang on, let me go back at the top. Sorry. We got the book series. So this is by topic first, and then you've got the books that different people recommend. So you've got James Corbett's recommendations. You've got Kevin Cole's recommendations. You have Richard Grove's Inner Circle, Outer Circle, and recommendations. Right? You got Palestine, if you want to learn about that. Israel, if you want to learn about that. Illuminati, if you want to learn about that. Then you can go down to book genres, and a whole list of genres here. And then you've got authors underneath that. So just a fantastic resource, a real good one-stop shop for learning. I think you'll find lots of familiar names on here. Here he's got Quigley, he's got Cecil Rhodes, also got C.J. Hopkins, who's the playwright who's currently being persecuted by the German government for publishing a book criticizing their response to the Big C event, right? Kathy O'Brien, she was a whistleblower who had been through MK Ultra mind control. Who else we got? There's lots. I don't have to sit here and read through them all. All I have to do is tell you about this website, avail you of this resource, and now you have a place to go. But look at that list; it goes on forever. Check that out. Right at the bottom there, Zbigniew Brzezinski with Yuval Noah Harari. That's where they belong, isn't it? Right at the bottom. Scum. Anyway, that's the Duke Report. I hope you find that website useful, and do please head on over to Geopolitics and Empire and have a look at that interview because it is proper good, as we like to say. So I'm going to give you some links now. Firstly, I'm going to give you Geopolitics and Empire, the interview with Peter Duke. That's like first thing to check out. And then I'll give you Peter Duke's website, if I can find it. And I hope you all enjoy researching and supporting Peter Duke and benefiting from his excellent work. Because I've thought before about maybe putting together a book list or a list of the books in my library, but there's no point really when other people have gone and done that before me. We might as well all take the shortcut when we have the opportunity to do so. And there's plenty more on his website as well. He's got a Rumble channel. He's doing Substack. He's very active, and there's lots of stuff on there that I'm not even aware of and haven't had a chance to look at yet, because I only finished listening to the interview this afternoon, in fact. So that's pretty much it for tonight's preamble ramble. Look at that, under an hour. Goodness me. So before we get into the book, I would like to say, as always, you can support me at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. This is where you can find out everything you need to know about me and what I do. You can send me an email. You can drop me a few pounds, dollars, pennies, shekels, cents, whatever, euros, if you're in the EU and you like the work that we're doing here and the learning that we're doing. You can send a crypto. I have that as well. But more importantly, you can sign up to Rumble, Odyssey, Entropy, Instagram, Twixter, and Telegram, and YouTube to, like, comment, share, subscribe, and do all that good stuff. So the numbers go up and I feel good, because I'm playing the game of internet. And when the numbers go up, that's like scoring points on a pinball machine. And it's great. On this little link as well, you can also listen to the album that I made of my humble offerings to the world of folk music, acoustic guitar, and I like some of those tunes. Some of them are quite catchy. Some of them have a nice bit of wordplay in the lyrics. Some of them are bang average, but you will never find out which ones unless you go over there and listen to it and check it out. And then at the very top here, we've got a link for my free community, which is, we're into our second week now. I'll tell you a little bit about that on the next tab. So my free community is called Devised. It's on the school platform, which is kind of like a stripped down, simplified Facebook, which means it's very easy to use. It's very intuitive, and it's not at all challenging or overfacing. But you can go here, you can sign up for free. And when you do, you can get into the classroom and you can have a look at some of the materials that I have recorded and put in here. So I'm currently in the process of making a series of book reviews. I'm going to read 10 books about screen addiction and addiction in general, and I'm going to review them and put them in here for your benefit. So you don't have to read the book. I can read it for you and I'll tell you the good stuff. So currently I've got one book review in there, which is Trapped in the Web by A.N. Turner. The next one's going to be No Smoking by James McFadden, and that's no smoking as in K-N-O-W. Oops. No smoking. Not N-O smoking, it's no smoking. Great title, wonderful stuff. James McFadden is a beautiful human being, and I'm going to review that book next. So that's coming. That's going to be uploaded to the school platform. Then also in the classroom, we've got our book club replays. So twice a week, we meet together on Zoom. We read a section of a book, and then we have a conversation about what we've read. It's a book club, only it's online. Unfortunately, it's not in person. There might be an in-person one to follow at some point in the future. But for now, it's online. We've been through the first 2 chapters of 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. Tomorrow night, we're going to read chapter 3. If you want to join in, feel free to do so. You can just listen in. You don't have to speak. You don't have to come off mute. You don't have to switch your camera on. You can just log into the call and listen. Or you can get involved and you can show us your beautiful face and you can ask questions and you can go on this learning journey. No, nothing is required other than good manners, patience, your attention, and a willingness to learn, be curious, ask questions, and a willingness to share your reactions and your feelings and your thoughts and your experiences. You know, just being human, being decent to each other, and trying to uplift ourselves out of ignorance and apathy. This is a really, the first 2 chapters of this book constitute the introduction. So we're about to get into the meat of it with the first of his 4 arguments for the elimination of television. And this is a really well-written book. It's funny, it's humorous, but it's also incredibly revealing about what was known about television back in the 70s when this book was published. So you can watch the replays, catch up, and then if you feel so inclined, you can go over to the calendar here where you can see our schedule. And this calendar section is where you get to click on an event such as the book club. It tells you when it's happening, tomorrow at 7 till 9 UK time, and it gives you the link to join the call. And you can even add it to your calendar so you don't forget when it's happening. And these happen twice a week on Wednesday and Saturday. And of course, Tuesdays and Fridays, it's Hayes Reviews, which is where we like to stretch our attention span and do a little bit of learning. So that is devised, and you are more than welcome to head on over there. You can watch my little intro video where I say everything that I just said to you now. So I would skip that if I was you and just go straight to signing up and joining in. It's a lot of fun, and I think we all learn faster and more effectively when we have other people to discuss and exchange ideas with, right? Sometimes I've heard it said before that the best way to learn something is to teach it, and that is very true. I've said before, but I used to be an English teacher for 6 years. I was teaching English, and it was a wonderful job, and I enjoyed it very much, and it was very fulfilling. But I learned more about the English language in 6 years of teaching it than I did through GCSEs and A-level English and a degree in English as well, right? So once I was standing in front of the classroom and I actually had these blank faces staring at me, and I actually had to monitor their progress and see if they could understand what I was teaching them and trying to get them to do, that's when I really started learning about language and how it works, and pronunciation and phonemes and grammar, and that really accelerated my learning. So the point is that you can sit and be a sponge and take in massive amounts of data and information, but it's only when you start talking to other people about it, trying to express it and explain it, put it in your own words, trying to communicate the ideas, the key important concepts, that's when you really consolidate it, right? And that's what we do over on the Device community. It's about getting together, talking, discussing ideas. It's about breaking down the barrier, because right now it's me with a microphone talking and broadcasting out. I've kind of got all the power, not the power, but you know, I've got a higher volume than you do as members of the chat. So if we can get it into, I'm trying to break down that barrier a little bit and have more of a two-way thing going, more of a conversational approach to build up relationships, get to know each other, and have some more of those fascinating, interesting conversations about these topics. So school.com/deviced and allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Your kind attention, support is very much appreciated. And I love you all very much. I'm so humbled and honored to be here, to have people tuning in and checking this out. It's great, and it blows my mind, and I love every second of it. It just gets better and better the more I do it. So thank you. And with that said, it's time to go to our reading for tonight. We got 30 pages to get through. I already feel like I've probably rambled on too long in the intro, but we got to finish this book tonight. So no matter what happens, we're getting to the end of it, and we are going to tie it up and tie it off and tick it, because the next chapter coming up is immigration. And that's not going to be spicy at all, is it? Everybody's favorite topic. And I'm about ready to move on to a different topic now, because as great and eye-opening and fantastically well-researched and powerful and important as this book is, it's also kind of dry. And we're getting a lot of names and dates and groups. It's kind of light on narrative. It's a very sort of academic, factual piece of work. So it's not like easygoing, that it's kind of a rip-roaring adventure with thrills and spills and all that sort of thing. It is quite dry, like my throat when I speak for too long without taking a sip. So I'm looking forward to moving on to the next chapter. because immigration is something that I see around me all the time in the place where I live, communities and the places that I tend to go. So we got to finish this chapter tonight, in other words. And so that's what we're going to do. So continuing tonight with chapter 6 and the section. We didn't even finish this section last time. So we'll just go back and refresh our memory about what this section is even about. Long, massive section here. I think this is the bit about, okay, so this section is about the Curtis-Churchill connection, and all about how Churchill was actually a big advocate for the EU, and that's kind of left out. But I tend to think these days that every household name has been involved in this conspiracy in one way or another, so I'm not too surprised that Churchill was so heavily involved in it. But we left off here, and we're going to continue from this part here. So, page 290. Apart from France, where in 1947, 61% of the population apparently favoured a United States of Europe and Italy, there is no evidence that the European Community project enjoyed the support of the European people. On the contrary, in the 1950s, its architects found it necessary to organise massive propaganda campaigns all over the continent, especially in Germany, to promote their agenda. In addition, as pointed out earlier, they successfully suppressed debate, let alone opposition, to the Europeanist project. In Britain, both the Conservative and the Labour parties initially opposed British membership of the European Community and Common Market, which was unpopular with their rank-and-file members. The Conservatives rightly rejected the implied loss of British sovereignty, while Labour worried that joining non-socialist Western European countries like Christian Democratic West Germany and Gaullist Republican France would be detrimental to the development of socialism in Britain. There is no doubt that Labour would rather have joined the Soviet Union, which remained Labour's social and economic model into the early 1960s. This was the true reason, and not any kind of suddenly discovered patriotism, behind Harold Wilson and Hugh Gaitskell's opposition to British membership in 1962. But there was no shortage of federalist unionist elements quietly working behind the scenes for British participation in a united Europe. Among Labourites, R.W.G. Kim Mackey of the Fabian International Bureau and personal friend of Lionel Curtis was a chief advocate, while among Conservatives there were figures like Robert Boothby of the Council of Europe, a former private secretary to Winston Churchill and a member of his United Europe movement. Moreover, there was broad support for a united Europe, with or without Britain, among Britain's political elites. In 1952, Clement Attlee launched the Socialist Union, which campaigned for a socialism-based European federation. Already in 1943, Conservative PM Churchill had campaigned for a Council of Europe complete with High Court and armed forces, and this was established in 1949 by the Treaty of London. As already noted, Churchill founded his own United Europe movement soon after the war. At one of its meetings, Churchill insisted that the United States, the Soviet Union, the British Empire and Europe were, quote, the four main pillars of the world temple of peace. This was in fact nonsense. Churchill himself, over the heads of his own cabinet, had drafted the 1941 Atlantic Charter, which promised self-government to all colonies, and the British Empire was being dismantled by the new Labour government as he spoke. Similarly, Attlee, who replaced Churchill as Prime Minister in 1945, declared that Britain was not strictly a European power. We are a member of the Commonwealth. The truth was that Attlee himself was a key architect of decolonisation. Moreover, the Commonwealth had been designed by the same Milner-Fabian interests as a substitute for the British Empire, and was itself slowly but surely eluding British influence or control. By 1948, while Attlee was in office, the British Commonwealth had ceased to be officially referred to as British. That the dominions were to be called Commonwealth of Nations instead of British Empire had been decided by leading Milnerite Lionel Curtis as far back as 1911. Both the Milner Group and the Fabian Society had long campaigned for independence for all British dominions, colonies, and other territories. They had in fact instigated independence movements all over the world as part of their New World Order designs. Milnerite David Astor, who bankrolled the European movement, also supported the black nationalist and pro-socialist African National Congress. Similarly, the Fabians had their hands in all anti-British movements from Africa to India. Gandhi and Jinnah had joined the London Fabian Society, the Labian Society. That's a totally different, separate topic. Don't be Googling that one. The London Fabian Society in the early 1920s, while many African leaders later joined the Fabian Colonial and Africa Bureau. The shocking truth was that while the British had won the war abroad, they had lost the war at home. While Churchill was fighting National Socialism on the continent, his deputy Attlee was building Fabian socialism in Britain. Already in 1941, taking advantage of the newly introduced measures of state control under the Churchill-Attlee government, the Fabian leadership had called for a great forward leap into socialism in imitation of the Soviet Union. The whole wartime period was cynically used by the Fabian Society and its Labour Front to convert Britain to socialism, which became the country's official regime in 1945. The British establishment's propaganda machine skillfully emphasises the defeat of Nazism while being quiet on the victory of socialism. The fact is that the two events cannot be separated. In a world historical context, Nazism was the mortal enemy of socialism. The whole conflict had started with the legitimate struggle of the nationalists against the socialists, hence Hitler's occupation of Poland as a prelude to his invasion of socialist Russia. The very raison d'etre of Nazism was the destruction of socialism. Defeat for the former necessarily meant victory for the latter. It follows that it was not Britain who won the war, but socialism and the international money interests who had financed the war. As in the previous World War, when the parties of the Socialist International vowed to use the crisis created by the war to bring down capitalism and establish socialism, the establishment of socialist rule had been a central war aim of Labour and other allied socialist parties. On his part, though, professing to, quote, hate socialism, Churchill did absolutely nothing to stop it from taking over Britain. Indeed, so fond had Churchill grown of the Conservative coalition with Socialist Labour that he wanted it to continue after the war, and there is no doubt that his honeymoon with Labour would have carried on indefinitely had he not been turned down by Labour. It was Churchill, too, who ensured the socialist takeover of much of Europe by giving several Eastern European countries to Stalin at the 1945 Yalta Conference. On his part, Churchill's collaborator, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, allowed Stalin's Red Army to occupy Berlin and East Germany, thereby thrusting the poisoned dagger of socialism right into the heart of Europe. Unsurprisingly, the Fabian socialist Rockefellers financed Eisenhower's presidential candidacy. To put the matter in the right perspective, Churchill and his collaborators destroyed Nazism but saved socialism. They liberated France from Hitler only to give Poland and half of Europe to Stalin. They deposed one dictator only to reinforce the rule of another. As for Britain, not only had it been delivered into the clutches of socialism, from which it has never fully liberated itself, but its own position in the world was rapidly deteriorating thanks to the treacherous policies of its progressive elites. How little these elites really cared about Britain and the British people is evident from their immigration policies, which allowed millions of non-Britons to colonize the country with impunity. There is absolutely no evidence that Britain was better off after the war than before the war. Churchill himself was depressed by the fact that he would leave Britain much worse than he found it. But it was Churchill and the money interest behind him who were responsible for the situation Britain was in. It was Churchill too, along with US President Roosevelt, who had drafted the Atlantic Charter, which effectively imposed the dissolution of the empire. After the war, as the British Empire was being taken apart with the independence of India, Pakistan, Egypt, and other territories, there was not much empire or commonwealth left to do business with or to extract resources from. India, Egypt, and other places which had been socialized by the Fabians were increasingly doing business with the Soviet Union and its socialist satellites. By 1947, the Colonial Office was lamenting that Africa was, quote, the only continental space from which we can still hope to draw reserves of economic and military strength. Unfortunately, the Labour Party's imperial and international advisory committees had been run by Fabian arch anti-imperialist Leonard Woolf from the early 1920s. And remember, Leonard Woolf wrote the book International Government, which I have up there on the shelf. I've shown that on the stream before. That's from the early 1900s, actually. It's quite an old book. The CO itself was now run by Colonial Secretary Arthur Creech Jones, another notorious Fabian anti-imperialist, former chairman of the Fabian Colonial Bureau and co-founder of the Fabian Africa Bureau, organizations fighting tooth and nail for the dissolution of the empire. Creech Jones was succeeded by his fellow Fabian and anti-imperialist activist Jim Griffiths. Fabian permeation tactics of course ensured that anti-imperialism reached far beyond labour circles, where it joined forces with the Milner Group's own anti-imperialists. Woolf's and Griffiths' conservative successors in the Colonial Office, like Ian MacLeod and Churchill's son-in-law Duncan Sandys, proved to be worthy members of the Decolonisation Brigade. Already in 1920, leading Milnerite ideologist Lionel Curtis had welcomed in his book Diarchy the mounting Asian and African challenge to white domination as inevitable and wholesome. In fact, there was nothing inevitable or wholesome about opposition to white domination. Firstly, it was instigated by Curtis himself and his Milner-Fabian clique, and secondly, when carried to its natural conclusion, it could only result in non-white domination of the world. Whose interests Curtis and his clique represented is evident from his appointment in 1912 as Beit Lecturer in Colonial History at Oxford. The lectureship had been established by South African diamond magnate and Milner Group financier Alfred Beit in 1905 and endowed with sufficient funds to finance all manner of subversive projects. Unsurprisingly, even the empire's last African remnant was soon rising up against Britain, thanks to the anti-British propaganda and agitation of Fabian outfits like the Fabian Africa Bureau, the Fabian Colonial Bureau, and the Movement for Colonial Freedom, along with the efforts of liberal Milnerites like David Astor, in collaboration with elements from the conservative Tory camp. As they were systematically dissecting the British Empire, the same treacherous elements were working to make Britain part of a new united or federated Europe. As already noted, Milner Group leaders Lord Lothian and Lionel Curtis had launched a federal union which campaigned for a federal Europe back in 1938. True. Leading Milnerites like Leo Amory and David Astor and their collaborators like Churchill and Co. ostensibly aimed to create a Europe united under British leadership. But while Britain, as the main unoccupied country and with US financial backing, was able to play a leading role during the war, it was highly unlikely that it could have maintained a position of leadership once the war was over. The empire was lost and US cash dried out. Leading Milnerites like General Smuts, Sir Edward Grigg and Lord Halifax were quite aware that Britain could not remain a great power after the war. In fact, the international money interests behind the Milner Group and the Fabian Society did not want Britain to be a great power. As true internationalists, they aimed to become the sole power holders in the world, unrestricted by political or territorial factors. A first step in this direction, as stated by US Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, was, quote, to move the financial centre of the world from London and Wall Street to the United States Treasury. As noted above, the US Treasury was firmly in CFR hands, So that moving the world's financial center to the US Treasury meant placing it in the hands of Rockefeller and associated interests. The intention of US bankers and financiers to replace London as the world's center of international finance went back to the First World War. And it's clear that Churchill himself, who was at home in these circles, was fully aware of this. In addition, Milner-Fabian, or Chatham House, decolonization plans tallied with American CFR designs to break up the British Empire with its sterling area and trade preference system, which were seen as detrimental to the US economy. This led to a collusion of British and American interests working for the dissolution of the empire. This was another fact carefully concealed from the public by Churchill and his entourage. Without an empire, Britain was bound to be drawn into the sphere of influence of continental powers like France and Germany, which, however, were controlled by the same international interests. It was these international interests, and not the French, the Germans, etc., that were pushing Britain away from the empire and into some form of European federation in line with their agenda of world domination. And even that kind of reminds me of this woke effort to decolonize certain things. And they say, you know, like mathematics has to be decolonized and we need to tear down all these statues of people who once owned slaves in the past. But they always tend to be statues of a certain ethnic background, right? And it always seems to be that the baby is thrown out with the bathwater, let's say. Because of course, all of history is riddled with slavery and exploitation and the dominant minority wielding the power, wealth, and influence over the majority. That has always been the case, and absent some massive change in people's behaviors on the day-to-day, probably will remain to be the case on aggregate. But there's this whole thing now about how the white people are responsible for all the slavery and the domination and the colonization in the world, and therefore they have to pay reparations and they have to step down off their pedestal and hand all the power over to the non-white peoples and give up their countries and give up their cultures and give up their security. And this is a good and noble thing for white people to do. And, you know, I don't even like using the labels white and non-white because we're all just shades on a spectrum. But what I'm referring to is kind of like the native peoples of certain areas. It's becoming, the narrative is that the people who are native to a certain area have to give up that homeland and share it with all the world's people from all different places. And yet we don't have another place to go to, right? If you emigrate to another country, you can always go back to the country of origin at some point. You have another option. But if you are just living in a place where lots and lots of people are emigrating to, and they start filling it up and putting strain on the infrastructure and withdrawing from the socialized system of taxation and like, let's say, healthcare or housing or education or whatever it may be, then without having ever paid into it, then that's a really unfair dynamic that is punishing the native population and is rewarding the non-native population who just move in from outside, right? So it's I don't think it's about colors and non-whites and whites. I think it's just more about native populations and the non-native populations. That's what I think. But just what Ratiu is describing here is being borne out and being seen in this like effort to decolonize, quote unquote, whatever it might be, whether it's schools or curriculums or corporations or museums or television programming. All of it is sort of under attack and has to be reimagined. And it's a very strange process to undertake. And I don't think it's being done with anyone's benefit, in mind, really, apart from people we're learning about here, the international interests, the internationalists, who are kind of running these scams and schemes from the very top, right? So, totally lost my place. I think here, right, we're at this bit, weren't we? The overall result was that in 1961, under pressure from domestic and international business interests, the government of Conservative Prime Minister Harold Macmillan applied for British entry to the EEC. As pointed out by Lindsay Jenkins, pressure was also exerted by the CFR-controlled Kennedy administration. Britain finally joined the European circus in 1973 under Conservative PM Edward Heath. Needless to say, both Macmillan and Heath belonged to the Liberal Milner Group. As already noted, Churchill himself, who was close to the Milner Group leadership, approved of Britain's application. Among Fabians, Harold Wilson and Roy Jenkins, who had been Fabian Society chairman in the 1950s, were leading figures in the campaign for British accession. Although Wilson was unhappy with Heath's entry terms in 1973, he had led Britain's entry effort in 1967. 4 years after Britain's entry in 1977, Roy Jenkins, who had led the Britain in Europe campaign, became president of the European Commission. So you get your awards, you get your pat on the head, you get your lucrative positions, and Roy Jenkins probably did better out of that than anyone else. Under his presidency in 1979, the European Commission established the European monetary system, which linked the currencies of most EC countries. Towards the end of his presidency in January 1981, the European Commission proposed closer cooperation between EMS central banks and the US Federal Reserve System. The project, known as FECUMization, maybe FECUMization, I suppose, after FECUM, French for European Monetary Cooperation Fund, was abandoned after being criticized for its potential to put control over national money supply in the hands of a supranational organization. The fact that it had been proposed in the first place exposes the European project's true objective. That's a very good point. It is to be noted in this context that Britain's 1961 application for entry in the EC coincided with NM Rothschild & Sons' keen interest in the common market's financial projects aiming to create a European bank. The Milner Rhodes Rothschild Group's long-cherished dream. Britain's entry in 1973 coincided with the Rothschild launch of the European Composite Unit and the European Council's European Monetary Cooperation Fund. The European Commission's 1981 proposal to link European central banks with the US Federal Reserve System coincided with the launch of the Rothschild-backed Channel Tunnel project. It may be added that the Channel Tunnel was another long-cherished dream of the Milner Group. All this not only demonstrates the EU sponsors' determination to place control over the world's finances in the hands of an international clique, but also expose the aims of the Fabian leadership as identical to those of the international money power behind the Milner Group. ESP, you're late, but don't worry about it. There's a replay and you can watch it. Right. You know that Ratiu is getting serious when he does a whole paragraph in bold. It follows from the above facts that Milner-Fabian elements were responsible not only for the creation of the European Union, but also for Britain's membership. These elements belong to the same groups who were responsible for the creation of the League of Nations, the United Nations, and similar outfits aiming to establish world government on behalf of a private international clique. That is pretty critically important. The correlation, or at least probably correlation is, I don't think that's going to be the right word. It's just this tracing back to the same people, the same movers and shakers, the creation of not only the EU but also the League of Nations and the United Nations really does betray the true intention behind these organizations, right? And there's like the exoteric and the esoteric. So the esoteric would be the secret hidden agendas that aren't made public and aren't broadcast and advertised to the Jacks and the Janes of the everyday masses. Then the exoteric, that's the forward-facing, public-facing, admitted, acknowledged version of things. And every institution, every organization, every group has esoteric and exoteric aspects to it. So there's going to be an inner clique to every business, to every religious group, to every organization, every association. There's going to be an inner clique who have their own motivations and goals and plans and purposes, but they're not going to openly broadcast that outwardly to everybody who looks at it, right? They're going to have an exoteric narrative. They're going to have a public, forward-facing version of who they are and what they're up to, and they'll broadcast that out, and they'll advertise and market that version of things to the public. So it's very important to be aware that there's always going to be an exoteric and an esoteric side to things, and unfortunately, because of this secrecy, because of, for example, like I talked about in the last stream, the government's willingness to break its own rules about making information publicly available, because of operating in the shadows and keeping these kinds of schemes and plans in hard to find places, namely the pages of a book, of books that are hard to get hold of, or not widely available, or that are expensive. That is what causes people to guess and to come up with conspiracy theories and to try and piece what is going on together. And paint a picture of what's going on, like it's all the secrecy and hiding of the real plans, and there cannot be a benevolent motive for all that secrecy, right? There has to be, because if you were benevolent and you were well-meaning and well-intentioned, you would be open and transparent, right? So it's only because of malevolent intentions that secrecy and obfuscation and occulting of information takes place. So, back to the book. It must be recalled at this point that colonial possessions and empires had in fact been a source of division and tension among leading European nations like Britain, France, and Germany. Britain itself was a European nation whose Anglo-Celtic population was closely related to the Celts. So it should be Anglo-Celtic, shouldn't it? Sorry. Population was closely related to the Celts of France and the Anglo-Saxons of Germany. It was universally acknowledged by historians and politicians alike, even in those days, that the English were descendants of the Angles and Saxons who had settled in Britain in the early 5th century. The original homeland of the Anglo-Saxons who spoke a Germanic language was the Angeln Peninsula and Lower Saxony in North and Northwest Germany. It follows that Germany was the mother country of the English people. Unfortunately, this fact did not prevent Churchill and his entourage from portraying the British and Americans as the only Anglo-Saxons on Earth. The tendency to distort facts for personal gain has been inherited by the Anglo-Saxon Churchill from his French-American mother, Lady Randolph, the editor of the propaganda publication Anglo-Saxon Review. And so, in the parallel or Alice in Wonderland universe of British patriotism, Britons and Americans came to be promoted to the rank of true Anglo-Saxons, while Germans, the original Anglo-Saxons, were demoted to that of Huns. As we saw earlier, this misguided patriotism was shaped by the systematic propaganda of the Pilgrim Society, the Daily Mail, and the money interests behind them, and remains so to this day. The fact that the same interests have long replaced the slogan "We are Anglo-Saxons" with "We are all Africans" only serves to illustrate the New World Order dictatorship built on memory blurred by the multiplicity of daily news and judgment baffled by its perversion. How baffled public judgment was can be seen from the fact that, ethnically and culturally speaking, Britain was better off in white Christian Europe than in the largely non-white and non-Christian empire or Commonwealth. Moreover, a united Europe was the only way to consolidate and save European civilization. Unfortunately, saving European civilization and the white race was not the Europeanists' primary or even secondary concern. Their main concern was economic and political, hence the European Economic Community, and was inspired by international financial interests. The European Community was not created by those who wanted to save Europe, but by those who wanted to monopolize Europe's economy for their own purposes. Very, very critical point. It's all about resources and finances. Therefore, those wishing to join the European community were facing the following problems. The first of these was that the community was designed and run by the left, not in the interests of the people, but in the interests of international socialism, which was in turn driven by international financiers pursuing their own agenda of world domination. The second problem was that it was designed not as a loose, voluntary economic association, but as an ever tighter economic and political union, leading to loss of national sovereignty to member countries. And that ever tightening nature of the EU is made possible by the fact that it's all run by treaties and then amendments to treaties, right? The third problem was that in spite of apparent economic growth, this union was in fact ridden with debt, as, incidentally, was Britain itself. Yeah, so that's John Maynard Keynes' world-changing idea of why don't governments spend money they don't have. Under these circumstances, the European community was a scam, and no responsible British or continental government should have advocated membership. True democracy is based on the people, that is, the nation. Like good neighbours, neighbouring nations must cooperate economically and, if need be, militarily. What they must not do is merge their populations into an amorphous supernation where they lose their identity, independence, and freedom. This is the difference between genuine people-oriented democracy on one hand and money-centred internationalism on the other. Lionel Curtis, the mastermind behind the European project, wrote, quote, "We can surely foresee a world government, without assuming a human society in which all the racial elements have been mixed into one conglomerate following one standardized way of life. Such a human society would have acquired the uniformity of a jellyfish, a one-celled organism, the lowest form of physical life." But this uniform conglomerate of racial cultural elements is precisely the kind of society which his Milner-Fabian successors are aiming to construct. Oh, we've got TC over on YouTube saying I watch all of your videos. Well played. If that's true and you do watch all my videos, I'm very impressed, because that's a lot of hours. LJ says, "Oh, how all history has been fooled around with. Will we ever know the truth?" Well, not without a massive amount of study and reading and a Herculean effort of learning and concentration. That's for sure. And even then, maybe not. Frank says, "The Republic of Ireland then never quite managed to get out from under the masked empire, eh? It was, like other areas, simply granted independence because that's what seemed to be in vogue." Yeah, I think there's a like the granting of independence. One of the things not David Duke, it's a different guy altogether. Peter Duke talked about in that interview on Geopolitics and Empire was the true meaning of the word liberty. And he says that there's a very big difference between liberty and freedom. And not a lot of people, especially in the freedom and truth movements, know what it is. So the idea is that liberty is something that is that is given to you by a higher authority. And he uses, actually, fittingly and appropriately enough, a maritime example. He says liberty is what captains give to their crew when they dock. And he says to them, okay, now I will give you your liberty. You can go and do what you want, and I'll have no problem as long as you're back at the specific time ready to set sail again and continue with the journey. And so it has this maritime connotation. That Phrygian cap that I just briefly showed you in the preamble ramble is very much, in Peter Duke's assessment, is very much linked to this concept of liberty, which is granted to you by a higher authority, a higher man-made authority, a higher man-made juridical person, maybe, perhaps, rather than the freedom you enjoy as a living man upon the earth that has been granted to you by the creator of this place and of this realm, whatever shape or size it may happen to be. Okay, so that's where common law is derived from. You have rights inherent within you that are granted by nature of your existence by the creator. I don't know then what the implications are for the different holy books, and it's not an area that I know enough about to really comment on, but my learning has taken me at least as far as to believe that in a creator and in a benevolent aspect behind reality, whereby things are not motivated by things don't seem to have an inherent drive towards pain and suffering and struggle and death and despair and all that nasty stuff. Otherwise, every second of every day would be some sort of torturous torment. And that's not the case. It's actually most seconds in most days have things like comfort and beautiful natural scenes. If you look at if you look at nature as opposed to the man-made world, the world the creator provided to us, it's stunning. It's beautiful. The cycles, the nature, the seasons of nature, the animals, it's so full of just magic and love and compassion, and yes, there's predators and there's danger and cataclysms and all that, of course. But there's also a lot of beauty and love and nourishment and wholesome, uplifting wonder to be experienced out there as well, at least in my assessment from my point of view, right? So this all ties in and is very connected and is linked to this concept. So freedom versus liberty, they're two different things, but I'm sure they have been convoluted and mixed up in the minds of most of us, and that's done again by design and on purpose by the social engineers, by the internationalist world controllers, and this is why we've got to be extremely clever with our language, the words we use, and we've got to use them deliberately, and that comes through practice. It comes through talking to people. I have noticed in myself a much greater ability to express concepts and ideas than when I first started broadcasting, because I've done so many hours of sitting here talking into a microphone now. And I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I've certainly improved is what I'm saying, because practice makes better. So get your practice in and talk to people. And if you are stuck for places where you can find people to talk to about this sort of stuff, then you can join my online community, Devised, because that's exactly what it's for. So we got PW in the chat on YouTube saying, good evening, Nick, hope you are well. I am very well. Thank you very much for joining and for your well wishes. I hope you're well too. Over on Rumble, we've got Faith saying, I agree with you about migration. It makes one wonder how many times they have moved the peoples of the earth around. You wonder if any peoples are native to where we know of them now. Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. I do think it's a divide and conquer strategy, isn't it? And you have the metaphor is the ants, right? You put red ants and black ants in a jar, and they just kind of live peacefully doing their going about their business, right? Being ants, until you shake the jar. And when you give that jar a good shake, then the ants attack each other, because the red ants think it's the black ants causing the discomfort and the stress, and vice versa. And that is that is exactly the system. Like, mix a bunch of different people together with different cultures and values and religions and cuisines and languages. Then you shake the jar, right? You put some economic pressures in. You manufacture a food crisis, or you put a lot of propaganda playing one group off against another, and then you watch them fight each other and wipe each other out. And you give yourselves a pat on the back because you've just culled a large portion of the human population, and you didn't have to get any dirt under your fingernails because you're a lazy Fabian socialist who hates to do any work themselves, right? So once you start to recognize the patterns and you understand the methods and the way it's done, then you can see it very clearly happening, and that's what it's all about. And I have to say as well that Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World Revisited, is a real masterpiece on explaining the methods and giving you an insight into how it's done. And it's only 150 pages long. And yet, Melissa and I got 5 hours worth of content out of it by discussing some of the quotes and the revelations that are in this tiny little book. All right, I said we're going to finish the chapter tonight, so I better get back to the book. ESP over on Odyssey says, I was just watching a David Icke video where he was explaining how Ted Heath got us into this mess. Yeah, I've heard David Icke talk about Ted Heath quite a few times as well, and he never has anything good to say. That's for sure. I don't know so much myself about Ted Heath, but sounds like he was a bit of a key player in rolling out this particular conspiracy, though. All right, so we're on to the next section now, which is the EU and world government. As noted earlier, the idea of a united Europe as part of a worldwide government system was not new. It went back to Victor Hugo and Cobden and their United States of Europe, which they aimed to merge with America. Indeed, the very name United States of Europe was modelled on the USA, a creation of left-wing forces, as was Napoleonic France itself. Under the influence of socialist leaders like Marx and Engels, these left-wing forces gradually crystallized into socialist regimes, all of which called for various forms of world government. By the end of World War II, between 1945 and 1950, these regimes virtually ruled the whole world. Britain was run by Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee, who came to power in 1945. France was run by Socialist President Félix Gouin, 1947. Russia was run by Socialist Stalin from 1924. China was run by Moscow-appointed Socialist Mao Zedong from 1949. The United States was run by the Council on Foreign Relations, which was dominated by corporate socialists like the Rockefellers and their Fabian Milnerite collaborators from the early 1940s. India was run by Fabian socialist Jawaharlal Nehru from 1949. Milnerite Arthur Salter had made it very clear in his writings that his United States of Europe was to be an integral part of the League of Nations. In 1945, socialist governments and their Milnerite collaborators set up the UN, which they admittedly intended to make into a world government. The main objective of Britain's 1945 to 1951 Attlee government was, quote, the conversion of the United Nations into some form of world government. This applied to socialist regimes across the globe. It must be noted that a united Europe coincided with the European theatre of power, which was to be part of the Anglo-American world order on Harry Hodson's model. It follows that the reason why the international Milner-Fabian clique pushed for a federal Europe, a United States of Europe, a European Union, and other such supranational constructs was that they wanted to make Europe a political entity modelled on the United States and the Soviet Union, regarded by Fabians as a union of Fabian states, as a first step towards merging all three entities into a socialist world state. As America and Russia had no empires, Britain was not to have one either. After all, there was to be a single world empire. Imperialism had become the exclusive preserve of the Milner-Fabian masters of the new socialist world order. In 1949, leading Fabian Sir Stafford Cripps, who became Fabian Society president just 2 years later, declared, quote, the liquidation of the British Empire is essential to socialism. The Fabian Society, of course, was one of the main string pullers behind the international world government conspiracy, which it discreetly orchestrated through the Socialist International, which had been based in London since the time of Karl Marx. It was especially able to do so while coordinating continental governments in exile in London during the war with the help of Rettinger and his Milner-Fabian network. A Fabian pamphlet of 1942, A World on the Future for British Socialists, unequivocally linked the unification of Europe with the fullest possible measure of agreement between Great Britain and the Soviet Union, adding that the only condition for cooperation between the Soviet Union and Great Britain was that Great Britain shall become, in spirit, socialist. Labour's own post-war document, Let Us Face the Future, insisted on the creation of a post-war association of the British Commonwealth with America and Russia. In 1951, the London Fabian Society recreated the Socialist International, which was headed by Morgan Phillips of the Fabian International Bureau. At its first Congress at Frankfurt, the SI declared that national sovereignty must be transcended. At the 2nd of June to the 4th of June 1962 Oslo Conference, the Socialist International made its position even more clear, resolving that, quote, the ultimate objective of the parties of the Socialist International is nothing less than world government. As noted earlier, Guy Mollet of the Council of Europe Assembly was Vice President of the Socialist International and therefore an advocate of world government. He was also one of the first participants in Bilderberg meetings. Another Socialist Internationalist, Paul Henry Spaak, was the COE Assembly's president. Meanwhile, at its 1947 Montreux Congress, the European Union of Federalists, aka Union of European Federalists, which was linked with Lionel Curtis' Federal Union, declared that the old world was on its deathbed, calling for a world federal government and openly admitting that by the very fact of pursuing a European policy, we are already pursuing a policy of world order. EUF/UEF collaborated with other Europeanist outfits, with Chatham House CFR connections like the International Centre of Free Trade Unions in Exile and Sandys and Rettinger's Joint International Committee of the Movement for European Unity. The EUF/UEF became particularly influential in the European movement in the early 1950s when it was run by Russian-German socialist Eugene Kogan. In the early 1950s, the CFR-controlled American Committee on United Europe, the organization financing and coordinating the European movement, enlisted the services of US academics like Harvard professor Carl Friedrich, who, like Salter and Co., viewed European unity as a stepping stone to world federation. Among Friedrich's prominent students was David Rockefeller's friend, collaborator, fellow internationalist, and CFR member Zbigniew Brzezinski. Churchill himself stated, quote, "We are engaged in the process of creating a European unit in the World Organization of the United Nations, stressing that Europe was to be a subordinate element in the ultimate structure of the UN World Organization." Indeed, Churchill displayed an obsession with world organization very similar to that of Lord Salter and his friend H.G. Wells. One reason why Europeanists were so keen on bringing about European Union was set out by Lionel Curtis himself in his writings. Although Anglo-American Union was the original aim of the Milner Group, Curtis came to realize that to most Americans, a union with Britain would mean a loss of the freedom they now have. He therefore thought that this could only be changed when Americans have seen an international union in actual being and at their doors. The European community and Britain's membership were a necessary example to prepare public opinion in America for eventually joining the Union. There you are. Timmy says, Eugene, sus name. Yeah, it's not a name I would pick. I don't know any Eugenes. So perhaps that's why. Maybe it's reserved for the likes of Fabian collaborators and internationalist financiers. All right, continuing, because we've still got quite a bit to get through. Who rules the EU? We have seen which interests created the EU, the reasons why they created it, and the methods they employed in creating it. We may now turn our attention to the question as to who rules the EU. Even a brief overview of the history of the EU leadership will provide the observant inquirer with an insight into its nature. The first two presidents of the ECSC High Authority, which later became the European Commission, were Jean Monnet and René Meyer. The first president of the ECSC Common Assembly, which later became the European Parliament, was Paul Henry Spaak. Other leading figures have been Roy Jenkins, Jacques Delors, Romano Prodi, Javier Solana, Lord Mendelssohn, Baroness Ashton, etc. Obviously, most of the above were socialists, but while not all Eurocrats were or are socialists, even the liberals and the conservatives among them clearly work for the same globalist agenda. Therefore, we need to go beyond politicians to the powerful interests pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Key questions that need to be asked are, who are these interests? Why are they in a position to exert power and influence? How do they do it? The short answer is that EU economy largely revolves on trade and finance. This explains why business and financial interests play such an important role in EU politics. In addition, political projects are largely dependent on the support of the money interests. This enables these interests to influence and even dominate politics. Although politicians can exercise a great deal of power and influence, they are able to do so only within a narrow set of guidelines, which is largely determined by the money interests. In consequence, politicians often are mere administrators of power, while the real power holders are the money interests. A detailed study of the money interests' control over the EU would be outside the scope of the present analysis. However, given the key roles of trade and finance in EU economy and politics, we can easily establish who rules the EU by finding out who controls these two sectors. Former EU Trade Commissioner Mandelson is a case in point. As grandson of leading Fabian Herbert Morrison, Peter, later Lord Mandelson, was born into Britain's semi-secret Fabian socialist aristocracy, and by his own admission, quote, started his political career as a member of the executive of the Young Fabians, and has been a Fabian all his life at different levels of activism. A key architect of New Labour, Mandelson was appointed minister without portfolio in Labour's new elected 1997 government, becoming Trade Secretary in the following year. By 2004, he had advanced to the position of EU Trade Commissioner, and in 2011 was backed by Conservative PM David Cameron himself for the job of Director General of the World Trade Organization, which is about the highest official position that a trade bureaucrat can hope to achieve. While waiting for the WTO post, Mandelson has served as senior advisor to Lazard International. Of particular significance is the fact that while occupying various key posts in the UK and EU governments, Mandelson, who is a close friend of Nat and Jacob Rothschild, was also a member of Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission and attended at least two Bilderberg conferences. As the money power organ, The Economist was forced to admit, Mandelson had huge sway over government strategy and vast hidden influence. Further investigation reveals that TC members have included other prominent EU figures such as Roy Jenkins, Gaston Thorn, Javier Solana, and Giscard d'Estaing, and I think that's it. The Trilateral Commission was set up in 1973 by David Rockefeller, his friend Zbigniew Brzezinski, and other close associates as a policy-making organization whose declared purpose was to shape governmental and non-governmental action. Built on the network already established by the CFR, it soon acquired global reach through its American, European, and Japanese sections. Trilateral Commission members in 2011 included Lord Britton, former Vice President of the European Commission and Vice Chairman of UBS Investment Bank, which was formerly UBS Warburg, Michael Fuchs, Deputy Chairman of the CDU/CSU parliamentary group in the German Bundestag. Elisabeth Gioiu, Deputy Chairman of the French National Assembly. Mario Monti, Prime Minister of Italy. Lucas Papademos, Prime Minister of Greece. Lord Mandelson, Senior Advisor to Lazard. Lord Guthrie of NM Rothschild. Alfonso Cortina, Vice Chairman of Rothschild Europe, the European corporate finance arm of the Anglo-French banking firm Rothschild Group. Lord Kerr, Deputy Chairman of Royal Dutch Shell. Jürgen Fitschen, of the Management Board and Executive Committee of the Deutsche Bank. Heinrich Weiss, former Chairman of the Federation of German Industries. Richard Conroy, of Conroy Gold and Natural Resources, Dublin. Elsbeth Tronstad, Executive Vice President of SN Power and former Executive Vice President of Asia Brown Boveri Group. And an array of presidents, governors, and deputy governors of financial institutions like the National Bank of Belgium, the Austrian National Bank, the Czech Association of Banks, the National Bank of Poland, and the National Bank of Romania. And that's all from the www.trilateral.org, which I guess is a Trilateral Commission's website. I've never been on that. That would probably make a good preamble ramble. Maybe next time. Needless to say, these elements also run the European Central Bank, which is linked to other key European and international outfits such as the European Investment Bank, the European Investment Fund, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. In 2011 alone, 2 important trilateral members became prime ministers of EU member states. Mario Monti, chairman of the Trilateral's European section, became Prime Minister of Italy, while Lucas Papademos, former Vice President of the European Central Bank and the Bank of Greece, became Prime Minister of Greece. In short, the Trilateral controls the EU by controlling its trade and finance. And it says, see Appendix, page 526. So I'm just going to check that out quickly, because I'm not sure what's on Appendix 526. It's right at the back of the book. Oh, look, what's this? Huh, okay. There's a whole diagram here. I suppose it's giving you the layers of who's in control, isn't it? So this is a chart showing the Anglo-American establishment and its global banking empire. And then it's showing you on this side as well all the layers that are above the government. So you're down here underneath the government. We are down, I should say. We are down here underneath the government, and we get to vote, you know, red team, blue team every few years or so. But above them is all this stuff: philanthropic foundations, business discussion and lobby groups, multinational corporations, banking and industrial groups, think tanks, universities, NGOs, charity and foreign aid organizations, and then political parties, and then the state apparatus, the parliament, congress, law courts, etc. All of that stuff, all of that bureaucracy, soaking up resources and existing in order to further its own existence. So, continuing. And LJ reminds us as well, which I appreciate, is that Starmer is a member of the Trilateral Group. Yes, I've heard that in a few different places, actually. Did anyone see that clip of Starmer that TrueStream Media showed? And it was him saying that the current status of immigration in the UK is an outcome of deliberate policy, and that this country is a one-nation experiment of open borders and immigration. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that on video. And unless that's some sort of AI concoction, I was kind of flabbergasted that he went out and said that. I think he was trying to lay the blame on the previous, the blue team, when the blue team was in charge. But quite a startling revelation that everything that is happening and everything that is going on is a result of deliberate policy and has been done on purpose. The system is not broken. It's working exactly as it's supposed to be. All right, so continuing, we've got the question that arises next is who controls the trilateral? As Anthony Sutton and Patrick Wood have shown, from its inception, the Trilateral Commission has been controlled by those who created it, namely a group of international banks led by Rockefeller-controlled Chase Manhattan Bank, currently JP Morgan Chase. Who the other interests involved are can be seen from the Trilateral's European membership. Among early members was Arthur F. Burns, senior advisor to Lazard Frères & Co., who was also chairman of the board of the U.S. Federal Reserve, as well as a CFR member. The presence of Lazard representatives on the Trilateral demonstrates its links to the Milner Group, whose leader, Adam Maris, was a director of Lazard Brothers & Co. from 1947 to 1973. And director of Barclays Bank from 1953 to 1977. Other notable early members were Bank of England directors Lord Eric Roll, who was also chairman and later president of the investment bank S.G. Warburg & Co., and Sir Ray Jedds, who was also a director of Shell Transport and Trading, the UK side of Royal Dutch Shell. And I think the book he's referring to when he mentions Sutton and Patrick Wood is this one here, which is Trilaterals over Washington, volumes 1 and 2, Patrick Wood, Anthony C. Sutton. This one's affordable, easy to get hold of. You can get it from Amazon. And Patrick Wood's still doing his thing. Still runs the website technocracy.news. Still going strong. And has done really fantastic, unparalleled research in the nature of technocracy and where it comes from, who's pushing it, and where it's going to go, where it's taking us. All right, continuing, 306. The Rothschilds and Associates were and remain closely linked with the above firms, particularly Lazard and Barclays. As already noted, Rothschild and Lazard set up the Channel Study Group in 1967. Nat Rothschild began his career at Lazard in the early 1990s. Lazard is a major shareholder of Barclays. Nat himself acquired shares in Barclays in 2007 through his investment company Atticus Capital. Marcus Agius, former Lazard chairman who is married to Catherine Rothschild, became chairman of Barclays in 2007. In particular, Rothschild interests were represented on the Trilateral by Baron Edmond de Rothschild, director of Edmond de Rothschild Banque Paris, and Baron Léon Lambert, cousin of the French Rothschilds, head of Groupe Bruxelles Lambert, and personal friend of David Rockefeller. The Rothschild associate mining giant Rio Tinto Zinc was heavily represented, with several leading figures from Chairman Mark Turner to Director Lord Carrington, who was also a director of Barclays and Hambros Bank, another close Rothschild associate. Outside the Trilateral, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers were linked through ventures like Rosing Uranium, of which Rio Tinto was a majority stockholder, and in particular oil interests like Shell, for which the Rockefellers Chase Manhattan acted as bankers and agents. In addition, a number of prominent Trilaterals were members of interlocking international outfits, such as the Bilderberg Group, the Atlantic Institute for International Affairs, the Club of Rome, Chatham House, and of course, the Fabian Society. Lord Roll, Edmond de Rothschild and Lambert were members of the Bilderberg Steering Committee. Roll, Jedds and Lambert were governors of AIIA, that's the Atlantic Institute for International Affairs. That'd be a good one to check out on a Preamble Ramble as well, wouldn't it? The Atlantic Institute for International Affairs. Max Konstam was a member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee and the Club of Rome. Sir Kenneth Younger, a member of the Trilateral's Executive Committee, was a former member of the Fabian Society Executive, the Advisory Committee of the Fabian International Bureau and Chatham House Director. Sir Andrew Schonfield was Chatham House Director. Dennis Healy was a former Chatham House Councillor, co-founder and former Councillor of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, former member of the Fabian Society Executive and Bilderberg co-founder. Incidentally, the Club of Rome was funded by the Agnelli Foundation, whose chairman, Fiat President Giovanni Agnelli, was a governor of the Atlantic Institute for International Affairs. Member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, a close associate of David Rockefeller, a member of Chase Manhattan's International Advisory Committee, and a long-time globalist. Thus, we can identify the basic power structure as a network of international organizations with overlapping memberships whose general policy is directed by powerful bankers like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and their associates. Just how powerful these bankers are is clear from three key figures of the Rockefeller Group at the time the trilateral was launched. This paragraph is this is a bit of a keeper, I would say. I'm just going to draw a box around it, because that's what you got to do when you find a good paragraph. Draw a box around it. I'll just take this bit again. Just how powerful these bankers are is clear from three key figures of the Rockefeller Group at the time the trilateral was launched. David Rockefeller, head of an international banking and oil empire, his brother Nelson, vice president of America, and their close friend and collaborator, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. If we include other key members of this group and associated groups like the Rothschilds, etc., it will be difficult to imagine a more powerful association of already powerful individuals and groups, and their power has undoubtedly increased since the 1970s. We'll put a little blue sticker on this one, shall we? Equally difficult to imagine is a group more closely associated with the EU. Indeed, trilateral members appear to be handpicked not only for their wealth, power, and influence, but above all for their Europeanist and globalist credentials. Trilateralists and their associates have been involved in various EEC projects from the start. Roll was a member of UK delegations to the OEEC and EEC and director of the Common Market Trust. As already noted, Edmond de Rothschild's banking group had close links to leading Europeanists like Jean Monnet and René Mayer. Edmund's cousin Guy was known as EEC banker, and the British and French Rothschild houses were active in important EEC projects. Among other key trilateralists involved in the European project was the Dutch politician Max Constam, grandson of Royal Dutch Petroleum founder August Kessler, former Secretary General of the ECSC and Vice President of Monnet's Action Committee for a United States of Europe. That Action Committee for a United States of Europe is the ACCUSE. It follows that these powerful international bankers and their associates have not joined the trilateral for the purpose of socializing with others of their kind, but are actively involved in EU affairs which are affecting the lives of millions of Europeans without the latter's knowledge and against their wishes and interests. The final question we need to address is what is the actual process through which these interests run the EU? To begin with, it is essential to understand that between them, the big bankers and their associates, the big industrialists and businessmen, control such enormous amounts of money that they could easily give orders to politicians. But this would be too obviously undemocratic. It would also have the potential to generate resentment that could work against them. After all, banks can be nationalized and their heads replaced with stooges of the political leadership. On the other hand, governments that do not enjoy the support of bankers do not, as a rule, last very long. To lend a veneer of democracy to the process and to protect their own necks, bankers and politicians tend to collaborate by consensus. This, of course, does not make the system any more democratic. Even dictatorships operate by consensus, albeit one between a reduced number of key individuals. In both scenarios, the masses are excluded from the decision-making process. The true function of organizations like the Trilateral and the Bilderberg, therefore, is not to relay orders from above, but to build consensus between the big bankers and politicians and to coordinate policy. Yes, it's about consensus is the key thing here, building consensus, isn't it? I remember as well the phrase international consensus popping up in one of the preamble rambles as well, but I feel like that was quite early on in the series. But yeah, building that international consensus, funding think tanks and institutes and research groups, and funding the areas of research that you want, that you know will come to the conclusion, the preordained conclusion that you want to find and justify, is how it's done, isn't it? The true function of organizations like the Trilateral and the Bilderberg, therefore, is not to relay orders from above, but to build consensus between... I just read that bit, sorry. This presents no major difficulty. Politicians are educated or indoctrinated in institutions financed by the bankers and run by chancellors, professors and lecturers sponsored by the same bankers, their families and associates. They often also frequent the same social circles and take part in the same events. Fundraising for foreign aid, for example, makes politicians appear more caring, which increases their popularity with the masses at home. But foreign aid, or third world development, also prepares the ground for bankers to make investments abroad and expand their global reach. As pointed out by the economist P.T. Bauer, foreign aid increases the resources and power of recipient regimes at the expense of the private sector, resulting in an undemocratic concentration of power. This, of course, serves the interests of the donors. That foreign aid lines the pockets of corrupt politicians, religious fanatics, or genocidal warlords is not something that would concern either bankers or politicians. On the contrary, problems created abroad equal reasons for intervention by bankers and politicians alike, and create opportunities for them to increase their own prestige, power, and influence. As a result, bankers and politicians often are personal friends, have the same interests, share the same ideology, and are partners in the same crimes. At any rate, it is profitable for both sides to collaborate. Should collaboration prove difficult, the bankers can deploy other instruments of power and influence to ensure that consensus is reached and that politicians toe the line. Bankers control both public opinion and government policy through the media and entertainment industries which they own and which are really the money power's instruments of mass propaganda, manipulation and control. Alright, this is really hot stuff here. Just explaining to you how it works. Academic and research institutions, think tanks and bodies of experts advising governments, etc. Uncooperative politicians eventually give in to media-generated public opinion, pressure groups, or advisory bodies sponsored and manipulated by bankers. As conceded by Tony Blair, quote, "For any political leader, the power of the media is such that you can't not have a relationship with people who are major and powerful media people." And, as already stated, collaboration with the bankers can be financially rewarding. Politicians like Tony Blair are particularly willing collaborators of banking, industry, business, and media interests. It is not for nothing that in the 1997 general elections, Blair enjoyed the overwhelming support of the national media, from The Times and The Guardian to The Sun, and even the centre-right Daily Mail. In 1993, he had joined the World Economic Forum's Global Leaders of Tomorrow group, whose members pledged themselves to advance the WEF's agenda as active members for a period of 2 years and for a further 3 years as supporting members. The WEF, aka Davos Set, is a massive international organization dominated by Rockefeller-associated banking and industrial giants like Chevron, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Saudi Aramco, and the Rockefeller Foundation, which has special status as strategic foundation partner. The Rockefellers were clearly pleased with Blair's performance, while Prime Minister soon after leaving office, they appointed him chairman of their JP Morgan International Advisory Council, on which he has had the honor to serve alongside long-standing Rockefeller lieutenants like Henry Kissinger and Kofi Annan, as well as representatives of Saudi and Chinese communist oil interests. So how about that? That's what you get for being a war criminal. At any rate, it is clear from the writings of Trilateral co-founder Brzezinski that in the technocratic New World Order envisaged by the money power, international banks and multinational corporations are to be the leading element in policy planning, which tallies with the agenda of leading Fabians like Michael Jacobs. Fabian influenced Dr. James Martin, a long-time employee of Rockefeller-controlled IBM, founder of the Oxford Martin School and a leading advocate of corporate-funded technocracy, concedes that the New World Order's growing dependence on costly public and international projects renders inevitable its dependence on multinational corporations, which alone possesses the necessary funds and means. Which alone possess the necessary funds and means. This, of course, can only serve to increase the power of corporate interests, allowing them to freely meddle in government policy, and shows the extent to which corporate-controlled socialism has become a reality. Indeed, it has been the established practice of those at the top of the pyramid, such as the Rockefellers, to lay out long-term policies while leaving the details to their spokesmen, who are strategically placed in positions of power and influence, particularly at the junction between the corporate and the political worlds. As might be expected from a system created by bankers and industrialists, therefore, the money power system operates more like a large banking or industrial group made up of a coordinating parent company and various separate subsidiaries than a military organization. The politicians' main role is to win the support of the electorate without disclosing their true agenda, while the Liberal Democratic Party system serves to keep the masses confused and divided and safe in the illusion that they live in a democratic society. In addition to the Trilateral, Bilderberg, WEF, and similar outfits which ensure policy coordination between money interests and politics, there are other groups that enable bankers and industrialists to actively cooperate with EU politicians in joint projects, in effect making EU policy, particularly through Business Europe, formerly Union of Industrial and Employers Confederations of Europe, or UNICE, UNICE, you very nice. I like you, you nice. Chief among these have been the European Enterprise Group, EEG, and the European Roundtable of Industrialists, ERT. The former was created in 1980 by the Confederation of British Industry, a Rothschild-Rockefeller lobbying organisation set up in 1965 to represent industrial giants like Shell, BP, Ford, and Fiat. As admitted by Dennis Healy, a leading member of its economic committee, the pro-EU CBI was heavily weighted towards the big international companies. Indeed, CBI's first Director General was John Davies, Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Shell Mex and BP, the Shell BP marketing venture, and a supporter of Britain's entry to the EEC. Again, we can see that there was little need for the Germans to frog-march Britain into the arms of the EEC when leading British companies like BP, which was half owned by the government itself, and Shell were doing just that. It should be noted in this connection that Rothschild-controlled Shell was heavily represented on the Trilateral Commission by Lord Cromer and chairmen and directors of various Royal Dutch and Shell divisions. At any rate, the aim of the CBI-created EEG was to place individual firms on UNICE policy committees and working groups involved in the EU policymaking. Thereby becoming directly involved and quite undemocratically involved in the EU policymaking. Yeah, there is absolutely nothing democratic about the EU. At all. But the sovereign comes from the ground up, don't you know? Yeah, according to Wikipedia. That's the sovereignty of the EU. It starts with the people and rises up. It's like the reverse of trickle-down economics. It's trickle-up sovereignty. The main role in the second organisation was played by the Belgian diplomat and politician Viscount Etienne d'Avignon, a long-time disciple of Paul Henry Spaak. D'Avignon succeeded Baron Robert de Rothschild as Spaak's head of private office in the 1960s, becoming vice president of the EEC Commission and Single Market Industry and Trade Commissioner in 1977. Under Trilateral Commission member and ringleader of the Britain in Europe campaign, Roy Jenkins. As EEC Commissioner, D'Avignon initiated and coordinated the negotiations leading to the formation in 1983 of the ERT, which, apart from ensuring cooperation between money interests and EEC politicians, was designed to function as a nerve centre for European integration policy. Indeed, the ERT's declared aim was to speed up the process of unification of the European market. Accordingly, the ERT took the lead in the creation of the Single Market Programme initiated by the 1986 Single European Act, while at the same time helping the Brussels bureaucrats, quote, organise and manage programmes that would put money in the pockets of their companies and also leverage commission power. In 1985, Davignon joined the Société Générale de Belgique, a long-time Rothschild agent, becoming its vice president in 2001. Davignon's collaborator, ERT co-founder and first chairman, was Per G. Gyllenhammer, chief exec of Volvo. Gyllenhammer became a member of Chase Manhattan's International Advisory Committee and later vice chairman of Rothschild Europe. The ERT, of course, interlocked with both the EEG and the Trilateral through members such as Shell and particularly Fiat, whose president, Gianni Agnelli, was a founding member of the executive committee of the Trilateral's European section, a member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, a governor of the Atlantic Institute, and a member of Chase Manhattan's International Advisory Committee. In turn, the ERT became a CEO-based model for other EU business associates, which, of course, represent or are associates of the same money interests. As evidence of its closeness to the EU hierarchy, the ERT moved its secretariat to Brussels in 1988, and from 1990, prominent ERT members have served within UNICE Business Europe. Needless to say, like CBI and EEG, ERT continues to be dominated by the Trilateral Commission and Associates. For example, the ERT vice chairman from 2006 to 2009 was Trilateral European chairman Peter Sutherland, who was chairman of Goldman Sachs International. Among other leading European figures associated with Goldman Sachs have been Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti, the head of the European Central Bank Mario Draghi, Greece's Prime Minister Lucas Papademos, and Germany's Angela Merkel. Goldman Sachs has also acquired a dominant position in the City of London, where the headquarters of its European operations is located, and has extended its tentacles into UK politics. Prime Minister Gordon Brown's advisor, Sue Nye, was the wife of Goldman Sachs International chief economist and senior partner Gavin Davies. What becomes clear beyond reasonable doubt is that members of the international money power are running the EU, being directly involved in EU policymaking. The round table, Gillingham concedes, would seem to validate conspiracy theory. It may be added that, once validated by hard evidence, conspiracy is no longer theory, but fact. So we're definitely dealing with conspiracy fact here, folks. And ESP says over on Odyssey, if ever there was a book to show how important books are, it's this one. I love it. That's a very, very good observation. And if you can hear any sort of background noise, I think that's my wife's hairdryer. So apologies for that if it's coming through on the mic. In addition to making EU domestic policy, the money power also controls EU foreign policy through foreign ministries and outfits like the Foundation for International Relations and Foreign Dialogue and the European Council on Foreign Relations. If the European CFR sounds very much like the American CFR, it is because the former is an extension of the latter. While day-to-day work is left to their like-minded representatives in business, politics, the academic community, and the media, big bankers themselves may become involved in the running of the global power network, at least at management level. A typical example is given by David Rockefeller in his memoirs. In 1974, 2 years after Iraq had nationalized all foreign oil interests, Rockefeller met with Saddam Hussein in an attempt to improve relations. Saddam's condition was that the US stop supporting Israel and the Kurds of North Iraq. Rockefeller passed on the message to his friend, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. In the event, suspension of support for Israel was out of the question, but US and Iranian support for the Kurds did stop. The fact that Nelson Rockefeller was US Vice President can only have made matters easier. As shown above, the Rockefellers' European associates have placed spokesmen for their interests in high positions in the same way as the Rockefellers have done this in the US. Like the latter, they are also directly involved in running Europe. For example, the Rothschilds played a leading role in Europe's privatization programs of the 1980s and 90s, and continue to act as economic and financial advisors to European governments, business, and banks. From 1999 to 2008, Rothschild director Peter Smith sat on CBI's Finance and General Purpose Committee. Once this fact has been understood, it is easy to see how the international fraternity's global network operates according to plan with a minimum of supervision or intervention on the part of the top leadership. Equally clear is that the initiative often emanates from across the Atlantic. Following a familiar pattern, a handful of leading Wall Street bankers, notably Henry Paulson of Goldman Sachs, in the early 2000s successfully lobbied the US government not only to exempt their firms from US net capital rules, but also to pressure the European Commission and EU member states into exempting them from EU financial directives, in effect imposing their interests on EU states in a blatant violation of democratic procedures. Incidentally, Rockefeller, in a later interview, described his meeting with Saddam as not terribly productive. However, as Rockefeller admits, he was able to do brisk business elsewhere in the region. As for Saddam, he made a deal which included substantial oil concessions with his personal friend, French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac, who was a close collaborator of former Bank Rothschild manager Georges Pompidou. This involved, among others, the Rothschild-associated oil company ERAP, which owned 50% of the Rothschild mining company Société Le Nickel, which was later named I-Metal. The Chirac-Saddam deal itself was part of the Euro-Arab rapprochement initiated by Rothschild Lieutenant Pompidou. The extent of the money fraternity's global reach is such that even when a business opportunity proves not terribly productive for one of its factions, it still makes a profit for another faction of the same fraternity. This ensures that the fraternity's overall wealth, power, and influence are constantly growing. In 2003, the fraternity was powerful enough to finally depose Saddam, after selling him weapons for decades, and get its hands on Iraqi oil again. Unfortunately, the demise of Saddam has not brought much democracy to Iraq, nor has it improved the plight of the Kurdish people, who continue to be suppressed, terrorized, and decimated by the money power's Turkish collaborators. Clearly, the bankers' much publicized love of freedom and democracy does not include nations whose existence is inconvenient to their financial interests. Indeed, no nation is safe in the hands of sworn internationalists whose declared goal is to abolish the nation and replace it with a global society ruled by a global government consisting of themselves. It may be noted in this context that in addition to industry, trade, finance, and politics, the money power controls natural resources and/or supply thereof, from luxury items like diamonds and gold to everyday staples like oil and its derivatives, petrol, etc. Water and gas and other energy sources like electricity, for example. Deputy Chairman of British Gas J.H. Smith, water and gas and other energy sources like electricity. I just read right over that full stop there. For example, Deputy Chairman of British Gas J.H. Smith and the Chairman of the French Electricity Board, Marcel Boiteau, were among early members of the Trilateral Commission. The French investment group Société Française et Industrielle Gaz and... Oh, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Look at that. Too many vowels in a row there. Is a holding company of Lazard who employs TC member Mandelson as international advisor, etc. Control over prices and markets in the oil industry is a prime example of money power domination of the economy at both national and international level. This is effectuated through certain organizations created for the purpose, for example, the International Energy Agency, set up by Rockefeller Lieutenant Kissinger in 1974 and launched at the Pilgrim Society in London to act as policy advisor to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of oil-producing and consuming countries and able to influence oil markets by releasing or withholding oil stocks. ICE Futures, formerly London-based International Petroleum Exchange, a central exchange for trading energy commodities like oil, gas and coal, whose head of European operations is former Shell chairman and chief executive Sir Robert Bob Reid, and New York Mercantile Exchange, which similarly trades in key commodities like oil and gas. An additional lever of control are OPEC members like Saudi Arabia, who depend on Anglo-American military protection and can be pressured into manipulating oil prices in ways that are beneficial to money power interests. The amount of research that's gone into this book is absolutely blowing my mind. It's staggering. All right. We still got quite a bit to go. We're definitely going to overrun tonight for sure. In fact, I'm just going to pause there and have a sip. I hope you're all comfortable out there with a nice warm beverage, or a cold one if that's what you prefer. All right, continuing. We've still got quite a bit to get through actually. Domination of international financial markets through global financial and banking corporations and international bodies like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is another instrument for manipulating and exerting influence or control over economies and the political systems depending on them, e.g., by providing or denying credit. As a classic example, the same money power who facilitated Russia's communist revolution of 1917 brought the communist regime down in the late 1980s when it had served its purpose by a combination of withholding credit and lowering oil prices, thus fatally weakening its economy, which was heavily dependent on oil exports. Similarly, EU members are forced to accept conditions set by the World Bank, IMF, or EBRD in order to obtain access to credit. In the political field, the advisory role played by members of the money power like the Rothschild Group enables them to exert influence on centre-left and centre-right governments alike. Thus, while N.M. Rothschild banker and Fabian Society member Liam Byrne is the founder of the influential Labour think tank Progress, N.M. Rothschild director and former FS member Oliver Letwin, an unreformed liberal, has been a leading advisor to the Tory party for several decades. This ensures that the political system in individual member states, as well as in the EU as a whole, is constantly moving to the left in the direction desired by these groups, even under centre-right governments. In July 2014, Byrne set up the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Inclusive Growth, an organisation chaired by Byrne and run by fellow Fabians Seema Malhotra, Rushanara Ali, and the founder of the Social Democratic Party, Lord Wrigglesworth, which praises the enlightened self-interest of Fabian sponsors like Cadbury and Unilever as a role model for other corporations. Finally, control over the media enables the money power to manipulate or suppress information related to its activities. From inception, trilaterals have included presidents, chairmen, directors, editors, correspondents, columnists, reporters and producers of news agencies like Associated Press, leading papers like The Times, Financial Times, Observer, Daily Express, The Economist, New Statesman, Le Figaro, Stamper, New York Times, and other media outlets like BBC and independent television news. As is well known, news agencies like AP, Reuters, and United Press International are the main sources for media outlets all over the world. I don't think it is very well known, actually. I wish more people knew about that there's these three agencies send all the news out to all the other smaller ones. So you think you have this multiplicity of news outlets, and they're all independent, and they're all trying to bring you the best, most true version of what's going on. But actually, they all get their information from news agencies, and there's not very many of them, and they are the ones that dictate what stories will be broadcast and published and printed and everything. And the problem is, as Ratiu is going to say in this next sentence, whoever controls these news agencies controls most of the news reaching the public. This is why independent researchers and writers and broadcasters are so very important. But even with them, you got to choose carefully and wisely, because there's plenty of controlled opposition out there. There's plenty of people who are run by, intelligence assets, for example. So taking in information from a wide variety of sources and using your use your nous, right? Use your intuition and really look at who you trust and think carefully about it, and be careful where you put your trust. But that isn't to say soaking up info from a lot of different sources is not valuable, because it is. Case in point, this book. If he hadn't gone to such length to read so widely, he would never be able to condense all this into this one book for us. So instead of having to do all this reading and research that he did, we can now just come here and read this one book and get it in its distilled, pure form. Yeah, so careful where you get your news, in other words. Examples of media finance interlocks are Sir Kenneth Younger of the Trilateral Executive, who was former editor of the Fabian International Review; Max Henry Freddie Fisher, director of the S.G. Warburg, who was also a director of Lazard Rothschild Associated Pearson, the parent company of the Financial Times, as well as an early member of the Trilateral Commission and Chatham House; Richard Dick Gould Adams, who was Chatham House councillor as well as a journalist with The Economist, prominent member of the Atlantic Institute, co-founder and later editor-in-chief of Independent Television News, co-founder of the Ford Rockefeller outfit, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and member of Wilton Park's Academic Council. The Economist Group, which publishes The Economist and European Voice, co-owned by the Rothschilds. Evelyn de Rothschild, chairman of The Economist between 1972 and 1989. Sir William Rees-Mogg, a director of Lord Jacob Rothschild's investment company, St. James's Place Capital, editor from 1967 to 1981, and later columnist of The Times, as well as a member of the BBC Board of Governors. Paul, later Lord Miners, a journalist for the Daily Telegraph in the early 1970s, who has held successive posts as a manager for N.M. Rothschild, director of National Westminster Bank, chairman of the Guardian Media Group, owners of The Guardian and The Observer, and member of the board of Rothschild Investment Trust Capital Partners. Lord Jacob Rothschild, a close friend and business partner of Rupert Murdoch, who was deputy chairman of the latter's British Sky Broadcasting Group from 2003 to 2007. Marcus Agius, chairman of Barclays, who is a member of the BBC Executive Board. P.G. Gillenhammer, vice chairman of Rothschild Europe, who is chairman of Reuters Founders Share Co. Sir David Bell, former director of the Lazard Associated Pearson Group, who is a director of Rothschild co-owned Economist and chairman of the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Daily Express owner Richard Desmond is president of the Rothschild charity Norwood. Similarly, in France, Baron Edouard de Rothschild, head of Rothschild and C. Bank, and director of Holding Francière Jean Goujon, is co-owner of the left-wing newspaper Liberation. Rothschild Associates Jacques Attali is an editor of the left-wing news magazine L'Express, which is modelled on America's Time. Rothschild Asset Management and Rothschild Associated Financial Corporations, Natixis, UBS, Societe Generale, and BlackRock are major shareholders of the media and entertainment giant Vivendi, which is headed by Vincent Bolloré, a former associate of Campagny Francière Edmond de Rothschild. That's quite a list. It is an established fact that media outlets are owned or controlled by a few interlocking interest groups. For example, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation owns The Sun, The Times, and The Sunday Times. Similarly, most of US media, newspapers, broadcasting, and film-producing companies are owned by about a dozen large corporations which interlock with those in Britain and elsewhere. Murdoch's News Corp owns the 20th Century Fox Film Studio, Fox News Channel, and has a stake in Hughes Electronics, which operates Direct TV, the US TV satellite system. This makes the entire media industry susceptible to control by a small, power-holding clique. As in Europe, the Trilateral Commission has had close links to the media from the beginning, numerous trilaterals serving as directors in the US media. In addition, leading journalists, TV presenters, etc. often come from similar social, cultural, and ideological backgrounds. This ensures a uniform, elite-dictated narrative produced by the media industry on behalf of the money power, which determines what the public knows, what it thinks and feels about the world and about itself, and how it behaves and acts in everyday life. Disturbingly, even the allegedly independent Media Standards Trust is controlled by the same interests. Its chairman is Sir David Bell of The Economist, and members of the board include Amelia Fawcett, a vice chairman of Morgan Stanley, Charles Manby, managing director of Goldman Sachs International, and Anthony Saltz, executive vice chairman of NM Rothschild. Through its control of publishing companies, the money power also controls copyright to important publications and is able to withhold reproduction permission for information that ought to be in the public domain and freely accessible to all. In a recent disturbing trend, the money power's publishing companies have taken to buying up self-publishing companies. See Pearson's acquisition of Author Solutions Inc. In effect, making it virtually impossible for dissident authors to find independent publishers for works that are inconvenient to the money power. In addition to controlling news agencies, publishing companies, and independent media standards organizations, the money power controls the intelligence services, particularly Anglo-American outfits like the CIA and MI6. Lord Victor Rothschild himself, who funded various publications like Encounter, was a leading MI5 agent with close links to MI6 and had his own private intelligence network stretching as far as Iran and China. As shown by Nick Davies of The Guardian, CIA MI6 operatives are being systematically planted in both news agencies and media outlets for the purpose of feeding fabricated or manipulated stories or fake news to the unsuspecting public. As Davies concedes, the more he looked, the more he found falsehood, distortion, and propaganda. As a result, although the media indulge in occasional criticism of the EU, this rarely amounts to a sustained attack and even less to an expose of the money interests behind it. This in spite of the fact that even amateur journalists, let alone seasoned professionals with Secret Service and other connections, could easily gather sufficient evidence from libraries and archives or by doing some basic investigative work. Particularly disturbing is the fact that instead of providing vital information to the public, the media industry itself doubles as a privately controlled secret service, which is not above spying on innocent citizens, as demonstrated by the 2011 telephone hacking scandal that led to the closure of Murdoch's News of the World. This Soviet-style systematic infiltration of the media industry by intelligence operatives serves the specific purpose of spying on the population under the cover of quote-unquote journalism, while providing a convenient screen of anonymity and deniability for the string pullers at the top of the power pyramid. Thus, not only do the media fail to investigate the masterminds behind the New World Order, but they turn on concerned citizens aiming to expose the truth, indiscriminately branding them far-right, extremist, or neo-Nazi in a malicious attempt to strip them of their humanity and deprive them of their legal and moral right to protest and resist. This is how the mass media industry becomes an instrument for reinforcing the ruling order, while journalists, like mainstream politicians, become its agents and partners in crime. Nor is this anything new. As pointed out by former MI5 and MI6 officer John Cornwell, alias Le Carré, MI6 has always controlled large parts of the press. On the available evidence, we now know that the intelligence services, in particular MI6 and its sister outfit, the CIA, were created by the same Anglo-American establishment who created the EU. As we have shown here, this clique is now ruling Europe, America, and most of the world. Incidentally, the current Euro crisis does not mean that the money power is in any way losing or even loosening its grip on Europe or its finances. The money power has always been adept at using crises to promote its own agenda. Moreover, the euro crisis was clearly engineered by the money power itself. Either way, the collapse of the euro as a European currency is likely to lead to the creation of a global one, in the same way as the collapse of the EU itself will lead to the creation of a larger economic entity, including parts of Africa and Asia. If anything, the money power is currently consolidating its grip on the nations it controls, as indicated by further ominous developments through Europe, such as the relentless expansion of EU and NATO in Eastern Europe. In Britain, the establishment has been pushing for new Stalinist laws requesting internet companies to install hardware enabling the government's electronic surveillance outfit GCHQ to monitor all phone calls, text messages, emails, and accessed websites in real time. That's a story from the Daily Telegraph. The money power already owns media and telecommunications companies, internet service providers, and search engines, as well as computer programs like Microsoft. Giving the state direct access to private communications is hardly going to deter professional criminals or international terrorist networks. For example, such legislation did not prevent the 9/11 attacks in America. Instead, it will amount to a blanket license for the money power in collaboration with the state to monitor and suppress legitimate political dissent. While the degree of control the ruling clique exercises on finance, economy, and politics is clearly undemocratic, its control over the media, intelligence services, and internet communication can only be described as dictatorial. The slippery slope towards dictatorship on which the political establishment is now treading is exposed by other Stalinist measures such as secret arrests and secret trials. Moreover, when private organizations like the Trilateral install their own members as prime ministers of EU member states, as in the cases of Italy and Greece, that is where democracy ends and dictatorship begins. It is also when public resistance must get organized. If Britain's conservative leaders want to prove that they are true conservatives and not lib-lab surrogates, and that they care about their country and its people, they must ensure that Britain gets out of the EU and out of the UN and reclaims its sovereignty as a matter of first priority. The same, of course, applies to conservatives and patriots everywhere. However, as we have just seen, the fact is that the world government clique, the international money power, holds the reins of power not only in the EU apparatus, but in the member states themselves. This means that the ultimate solution is the liberation of Britain and all other European nations from the dictatorship of this clique. Getting out of the EU, or liberation from the EU dictatorship, must go hand in hand with liberation from the current national governments, both the visible or official and the invisible or unofficial ones. This requires a concerted, two-pronged approach to the problem. In other words, it is the Conservatives' turn to become revolutionaries and put an end to the left's New World Order. Celine Lyon says, it matters not where the information comes from, it's one's ability to discern that is crucial to a healthy mind. Very wise words. All right, continuing. A number of public figures, among them Nigel Farage of the UK Independence Party, Germany's finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble, and France's left-wing eminence Gris Jacques Attali, have warned that Europe is on the brink of a revolution. To seize the initiative and prevent the situation from being exploited by the left for its anti-democratic ends, the right must understand some essential facts. For example, the revolutions do not happen of their own accord, without planning, organization and preparation, or without resources, support, and a coherent ideology or dogma. Above all, it is imperative to overcome certain fundamental misconceptions, such as that being on the right is sufficient in and of itself and renders all struggle unnecessary. That the right can win the historical struggle against the left by adopting more and more of the latter's policies, and that victory is possible without personal effort and sacrifice, or without spiritual and cultural revival. The revolutionary masses cannot expect others to be revolutionary on their behalf, but must themselves become revolutionary. every responsible citizen and believer in righteousness must become a standard bearer and defender of right against wrong, of justice against injustice, and of truth against falsehood and lies. It's quite a manifesto. Okay, so we've got a few more sections to polish off, and then we're going to be done. But that whole last bit was fire, pure fire. The kind of fire that burns the scales from your eyes, you know. Okay, the EU superstate. Although the European Union started off as an economic association, the so-called European Coal and Steel Community, the Milner-Fabian interest behind it and their frontmen like Jean Monnet and Paul Henry Spaak knew full well that their ultimate goal was political federation or union, leading to the creation of a European superstate. As noted above, Churchill himself in 1943 had proposed a Council of Europe complete with High Court and armed forces. In 1949, he expressed his hope that the European Assembly he set up would become the Parliament of Europe. As pointed out by Quigley, the European Coal and Steel Community created by the 1951 Treaty of Paris was a rudimentary government, as it had a common assembly which functioned like a parliament and a court of justice. The Washington Declaration of the 14th of September 1951, issued by Herbert Morrison, Dean Acheson, and Robert Schuman, stated, quote, "The three foreign ministers recognize that the initiative taken by the French government concerning the creation of a European coal and steel community and a European defense community is a major step towards European unity. The government of the United Kingdom desire to establish the closest possible association with the European continental community at all steps of its development. This, of course, raises the question of national sovereignty. There can be no doubt that none of Britain's major political parties regarded national sovereignty as non-negotiable. They all were prepared to sell British sovereignty provided the price was right to the politicians concerned. Churchill himself declared in the Commons that, quote, "The Conservative and Liberal parties declare that national sovereignty is not inviolable." That they were, quote, "prepared to consider the abrogation of national sovereignty provided that we are satisfied with the conditions," adding that, quote, "I will go even further and say that for the sake of world organization we would even run the risk and make sacrifices." Indeed, far from being inviolable, the total abolition of national sovereignty was a key plank in the Milner-Fabian European project. According to Monnet, national sovereignty was a defect to be tackled boldly, and the abnegation of sovereignty an indispensable first principle. Similarly, the 1950 Schuman Declaration described the European coal and steel community as the first concrete foundation for a European federation. It will be recalled that according to Attlee, the views expressed by Robert Schuman were in line with his own. It will also be recalled that the Council of Europe was Churchill's very own creation. Its 1949 Statute, Article 1, states, "The aim of the Council of Europe is to achieve a greater unity between its members." As Britain was a member of the Council, it is indisputable that Churchill's brainchild led to the inclusion of Britain in the European project. On the 25th of March 1957, before signing the Treaty of Rome, Paul Henry Spaak said to the head of his private office, Robert de Rothschild, quote, "We will rebuild the Roman Empire, and this time through the power of ideas, not by force of arms." Rothschild himself later observed with pride and satisfaction that, quote, "The European Union is in the process of reassembling the western provinces of the Roman Empire." I wonder what that book's from. It's from a Rothschild book. Rothschild, page 183. Just let me quickly check the notes here. Not sure. Right, it's going to be on this page. I think it might be this one then. So there's a book here, Robert Rothschild, Un Phoenix Nom Europe, Memoirs. So seems like it's a French book, which wouldn't be very useful to me because I can't read or speak French. So, continuing. The Roman Empire, of course, had brought slavery, death, and destruction to the people of Europe and Britain. Nor were Europeans told that their treacherous leadership intended to rebuild the Roman Empire. However, that the European Economic Community was in actual fact intended to function as a superstate like the Roman Empire is evident from its bodies, which are identical to those of a national state. And we're going to learn about those bodies right now. R. Murray 1 popped into the Rumble chat. How are you doing? Welcome. Good to see you. All right. The European Council. The European Council is the strategic body of the EU. It held its first meeting in 1961 and is located in Brussels, Belgium. It is headed by a president and is made up of EU heads of state and government who meet up several times a year to issue general policy guidelines. The Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers, aka Council of the EU, is one of the EU's legislative bodies making EU laws. It was established in 1993 as a successor to the Council of the European Communities and its predecessor, the Special Council of Ministers of the European Coal and Steel Community, and is located in Brussels. It is made up of ministers of the member states who are meeting several times a year. The Council presidency is held by the government of one of the EU member states on a 6-month rotation basis. The European Commission. The European Commission is the successor to the High Authority of the European Coal and Steel Community, whose first two presidents were Rothschild frontmen Jean Monnet and René Meyer. It is made up of 27 commissioners, who are headed by a president and forms the executive body of the EU. Both the Commission and its president are approved by the European Parliament for a 5-year term. The Commission's main seat is in Brussels. The European Parliament. The European Parliament is another legislative body of the EU which was established in 1962 as a successor to the Common Assembly. Of the European Coal and Steel Community. It will be recalled that the Eden Plan had called for the ECSC to be placed under the authority of the European Assembly, set up by Churchill in 1949. The EP is made up of members of the European Parliament who are elected by the respective member states every 5 years, and its main seat is in Strasbourg, France, which was also the seat of Churchill's European Council. The European Court of Justice. The European Court of Justice was established in 1952 as part of the European Coal and Steel Community and is the judicial body of the EU whose task is to interpret and apply EU law. It's located in Luxembourg. I just see as well we've got Margaret over on YouTube. Good evening, Margaret. Hope you're doing well. The European Central Bank. The European Central Bank was established in 1998 as a successor to the European Monetary Institute and the earlier European Monetary Cooperation Fund to maintain price stability, i.e. control inflation, in the euro area. The ECB is located in Frankfurt on Main, the historical seat of the Rothschild banking dynasty and headquarters of the post-war US military government in Germany, which, as noted earlier, represented international banking and business interests. Yeah, so Frankfurt is exactly, correct, the historical seat of the Rothschild banking dynasty. We read The Romance of the Rothschilds on the channel, and there's also a book I haven't read it yet, but it's called The Five Men of Frankfurt, all about Mayer-Amschel Rothschild's 5 sons who went off. So probably just a coincidence, though, that the European Central Bank is there, isn't it? Yeah, it's probably just a coincidence. It is run by the Governing Council, which consists of an exec board and the governors of the national central banks of the 17 member states and meets monthly for its monetary policy decisions. The European Investment Bank. The European Investment Bank is the EU's long-term lending institution, established in 1958 under the Treaty of Rome to further EU policy goals. The EIB is located in Luxembourg and is run by a board of governors made up of the finance ministers of the member states and a board of directors which are nominated by the member states and the European Commission. Among the EIB's largest projects to date have been the Channel Tunnel, which was aimed at furthering the development and integration of the European community, and the more ambitious and subversive Mediterranean Union. NM Rothschild have played an advisory role in both projects, as they have in EU enlargement and the privatization programs of the 80s and 90s. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development was founded in 1991 by Jacques Attali. All right, interesting. Who became its first president. Ostensibly founded to finance the development of the private sector in Europe's former communist countries, the bank orchestrated the takeover of Central and Eastern European economies by Anglo-American financial interests. In spite of its name, the bank's largest shareholder is America, which reflects the involvement of banking interests associated with the Anglo-American establishment. The European Investment Fund. The EIF was established in 1994 to provide funds for small and medium-sized enterprises. Through private banks and funds, it's located in Luxembourg and is owned by the European Investment Bank, which is the EIF's largest shareholder. The EIF is run by the president or vice president of the EIB. The above institutions show that the European Union is in effect a super-state, which, to a large degree, controls the political and economic activities of the member states, and which gets its sovereignty from the people, from the ground up. Don't forget that. The EU budget. The EU is a parasitic body costing around 144 billion euros a year, which is paid by contributions from member states. This in itself is a very large amount. As pointed out by EU critics, it's only a fraction of the total cost. The EU extracts several times that amount through bogus charges like import duties, VAT, administrative and compliance charges, etc., with the result that the real costs of the EU are many times higher than those officially admitted. The European Court of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights is another instrument of control created by the international money power and established by the European Convention on Human Rights, which was drafted by the British-created Council of Europe in 1950. As such, it is treated as part of the EU legal system, and its decisions are binding on all signatory states. Ironically, according to its own official figures, the ECTHR has blocked more deportations by Britain than by any other country. One of the most infamous cases being that of extremist Jordanian cleric Abu Qatada, who succeeded avoiding deportation several times thanks to the European Court of Human Rights rulings. That's from a Daily Telegraph story. The European Council on Foreign Relations. That's a new one. I didn't know that existed. The European Council on Foreign Relations is a clone of America's CFR. Like the latter in America, the ECFR has branches in various capitals across Europe. Established in 2007, the Council claims to be independent and has no connection to the institutions of the EU. However, its two founding co-chairmen were the Finnish socialist Martti Ahtisaari and the notorious German left-wing radical Joschka Fischer, both vocal EU supporters. While socialist EU Eminence Gris and TC member Javier Solana is member of the board. As it is highly unlikely that the above figures became opponents of the EU or severed their connections with the EU and its officials on joining the ECFR, it's reasonable to infer that the ECFR cannot be entirely unconnected with the EU. Indeed, we find that Ahtisaari is a member of the globalist Club of Madrid, which operates in close collaboration with the EU. Similarly, Solana is president of the Center for Global Economy and Geopolitics of Barcelona and Madrid. Both the Club of Madrid and the ESADE, which is the Center for Global Economy and Geopolitics of Barcelona and Madrid, are officially associated with the globalist think tank Foundation for International Relations and Foreign Dialogue, which is associated with the EU Asia Centre, Brussels, a think tank promoting closer relations with Asia and the Euro-Mediterranean Study Commission. A network, which itself is a network of centres specialising in foreign affairs and security, funded by the European Commission. It follows that if the said persons appear to be unconnected to the EU, it's only because they have bigger fish to fry. It must be recalled that the EU is only a step towards world government, as evidenced by the network of organisations it has set up for that purpose. It's now in a phase of transition towards that larger goal. The interests represented by the ECFR are evident from its members and funders. Members include leading Milnerite Andrew Duff, President of the Union of European Federalists, former Liberal member of the European Parliament, leading figure in the drive for merging the presidencies of the European Council and European Commission, and CEO of the Rothschild Associated Investment Bank, Piper Jaffray. Rothschild Lieutenant George Soros, founder and chairman of the Open Society Foundations, a CFR member. Mina Jarvenpaa, International Advocacy Director. Heather Grab, Executive Director, Open Society Institute. Karin Forsecki, former CEO, Carnegie Investment Bank. Anna Palacio, former Senior President and General Counsel, World Bank Group, and others. ECFR is funded by the OSF, its branches like the Polish Stefan Batory Foundation, and partners and associates like the Bulgarian Communitas Foundation. And yes, LJ asked, wasn't Starmer a human rights lawyer? Yes, he was indeed. Specialized in criminal defense. So, in other words, defending criminals. The International Crisis Group. Founded in 1995 to advise both governments and international organizations such as EU, UN, and World Bank on the prevention and resolution of violent conflict, the ICG is another Soros-backed operation run by Soros and collaborators like Ahtisaari, Fisher, Solana, Kofi Annan, and left-wing Harvard economist Lawrence Summers, and funded by the EU and various Western governments in conjunction with Soros, Rockefeller, and Rothschild interests. The activities of ECFR, ICG, and related outfits reveal a disturbing anti-democratic trend for a growing number of corporate-controlled, self-interested private organizations to advise or direct the EU and ultimately, no doubt, to replace the official EU apparatus. Well, we've got about 4 pages left of this chapter. But that is some heavy, dense info, and I have no reason to doubt its veracity. You know, I'm just blown away by there's no fluff. This is like 500 pages of just pure facts, data, and information, names. There's a lot of these organizations I'd never heard of. A lot of these different parts of the EU I'd never heard of. So this is quite an education indeed. I think we are very lucky to have this book. So, next we've got EU and immigration, and then multiculturalism, and then Islamization, and then we're done. So, let's finish off this final bit. I'll just have a sip. And then we'll crack on. So, the EU and immigration. Europe's decolonization policies of the 50s and 60s resulted in inverse colonization, in which mounting numbers of non-European immigrants began to settle in Europe. Although mass immigration started as a result of the policies of individual European states, the European Convention on Human Rights and EU law have increasingly imposed immigration policies that are beyond the control of member states. In Britain, European immigration law has led to the unacceptable situation where EU nationals have more rights than the indigenous British population. And the reference for that is a book by Jopke. Let's find out what that is. It's going to be it's before that page, if I've got my letters in the right order. Cristian Jopke is a book called Immigration and the Nation State, 1999. I was going to point to 1999 with my little finger then, but then it would be the devil horns and someone would be like, oh, Nick, doing the devil horns. Immigration and the Nation State, there's that book. Might be worth grabbing a copy of that. Of particular concern has been the 1986 Single European Act, which committed the European community to achieve a single market by 1992. It also mandated an area without internal frontiers in which the free movement of goods, persons, services and capital is ensured. While SEA may or may not have been good for business, it has certainly made it difficult or impossible for Britain to stop immigration from other EU countries, and increasingly from non-EU countries, immigrants from which are provided with travel documents by other EU member states. As pointed out by Professor Cristian of the European University Institute, Florence, Britain can only win this battle by withdrawing from Europe. However, the facts on the ground show that a British exit from the EU, although an important step, fails to address the problem of non-EU immigration. Yeah, I think we've found that out by now. The only real and lasting solution is to free Britain from the anti-national forces led by the international money power, which use immigration as a convenient tool for acquiring economic and political power to the detriment of the majority population. The EU and multiculturalism. In addition to politics and economy, the EU also increasingly controls the cultural life of member nations. The idea of multiculturalism was first introduced by leading Milner Group member Jean Buchan, Governor-General of Canada. In the 1930s, Buchan made the dubious claim that the strongest nations are those that are made up of different racial elements. Multiculturalism later became official government policy in Canada. Similarly, intercultural assimilation has been a key objective of European federalism from the early 50s. In the 60s, it was particularly promoted by socialists like former Fabian Society chairman Roy Jenkins, who was Labour Home Secretary, after which he became President of the European Commission. The promotion of cultural diversity and cultural dialogue has been the main strategic objective of the EU's European Agenda for Culture. In 2008, the European Commission launched a massive pro-multiculturalism propaganda campaign to raise public awareness in Europe of the need for intercultural dialogue and to promote intercultural dialogue as an instrument for exploring the benefits of cultural diversity. The EU and Islamization. According to Winston Churchill, the Battle of Britain in World War II was about the survival of Christianity. The truth is that neither Churchill nor his successors have made any effort to save Christianity from Fabian socialism, or more recently from the relentless advance of Islam. Already, after the war and beginning in the 50s and 60s, Islam became the main alien culture on European soil thanks to mass immigration from Islamic North Africa in France, Turkey in Germany, and the Commonwealth in Britain. This has meant that in Europe, multiculturalism has been mainly promoted for the benefit of Islam almost from the beginning. In November 1973, the 9 European Community member states met in Brussels, the capital of the EU, where they issued a joint declaration initiating a Euro-Arab dialogue with the objective of strengthening the ties between European countries and the Arab world. In 1995, the EU convened the first Euro-Mediterranean Conference of EU and Arab foreign ministers, at which it was resolved to strengthen relations with the countries in the Arab world and bring European and Arab nations closer together through cultural exchange. For this purpose, the conference established the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership. What becomes clear is that, in just 2 decades, the Euro-Islamic cultural dialogue became cultural exchange. The next step from cultural exchange was systematic promotion of Islam. This has been carried out through various EU-UN programs and organizations specially created for this purpose, such as the Dialogue Among Civilizations, introduced at a UN meeting in 1998, the Anna Ling Foundation for Dialogue Between Cultures, created in 2003, the Euro-Mediterranean Parliamentary Assembly, created in 2003, the European Investment Bank Facility for Euro-Mediterranean Investment and Partnership, also created in 2003, the European Neighbourhood Policy, launched in 2004 with the aim of strengthening EU relations with Muslim countries to the south and east of Europe, the Alliance of Civilizations, established in 2005 to build bridges between the West and the Islamic world and promote interfaith dialogue. At this stage, the EU was officially promoting not just Islamic culture, but also Islamic religion. While Europeans are urged to understand Islam, no effort whatsoever is being made to make Muslims understand Christianity and other European faiths. While thousands of mosques are being put up across Europe, no churches are being built in Islamic states. The annihilation of Christianity is the entirely predictable and clearly intentional result. That is some strong words, but I think borne out, especially in the way that you see priests represented in media, right? They're always criminals or sex pests or incompetent morons or buffoons or alcoholics or murderous psychopaths or something of that nature, right? You rarely see any positive depictions of Christian priests in modern sort of films and media depictions, or at least I don't know of any. Okay, we're on the last section. So, the EU and the Union for the Mediterranean. In July 2008, the EU convened the Summit for the Mediterranean in Paris, which was attended by EU and Arab heads of state and government, as well as officials from the League of Arab States, aka Arab League, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the Alliance of Civilizations, and the Ioan Foundation. The summit decided to launch the initiative Barcelona Process, Union for the Mediterranean, with the aim of merging Islamic North Africa, Turkey, and the Middle East with the European Union. The Union for the Mediterranean is scheduled for completion by 2030 and will bring 17 Islamic states with a total population of over 400 million into Europe, creating an Islamic superstate on European soil and permanently wiping out Europe's population, culture, and civilization. Again, strong words, but at least we've got websites to look into. I've never heard of this before. The process, of course, is being accelerated by millions of Muslim settlers from non-Mediterranean states like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh being allowed to colonize Europe with impunity. In sum, the facts speak for themselves. Whatever may have been the original intentions behind the European Union, it has clearly become an instrument for exploitation, oppression, and cultural and ethnic genocide against the European people. In the light of these facts, the people of Europe must indeed unite, not into a money-oriented superstate, but as a united popular front against their corrupt and treacherous leaders. A non-violent revolution to bring about a change of regime and a change of system in Britain, Germany, France, and other leading European nations is becoming the only viable solution. Mic drop. I gotta have a sip. Then we'll look at the references and get out of here. Margaret is saying Barcelona Olympics, first time monetized, 87, I think. David James says you can read it in his book Practical Idealism. So for people who don't know, that is a book by Count von Coudenhove-Kalergi. Practical Idealism. It wasn't written in English, so you'll have to find a translation unless you speak the language it was written in. Maybe German? Was it German? Not sure. Yeah. But these agendas go back very far, and I used the analogy earlier on in the stream about the red ants and the black ants and how you can put them together in a jar and they'll get on perfectly fine with each other, but as soon as you shake that jar, they start fighting. They think they are they blame each other because they're two different groups and they're not going to mix. And it's the same sort of thing that could happen, right? With it's like a tinderbox, mixing together different cultures, different nationalities, religions, making one side feel guilty about not like he talked about. It's one thing to encourage and facilitate, but like understanding that goes both ways. But I don't know, and I don't think that is what is happening. I think it's very much a case of the native Christian population have to do the accommodating and make room and make space for the people who are coming in, and their faiths and religions and cultural beliefs and traditions, etc. And it's not the other way around. There's no pressure, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, but there's no pressure in the reverse direction saying, oh, well, you're moving into this country, therefore you have to understand and respect and celebrate Christianity. I don't think that's done in that reverse way. If anything, it's seen as like, oh, you can't be too overtly nationalistic and celebrate your Christianity because you might offend the minorities, and we're not allowed to do that, are we? So, a lot of food for thought. Quite sobering assessment of where we're at and what's going on. David James says, practical idealism, it's in German originally, thank you. He says there's also the correspondence between Albert Pike and other Freemasons discussing a similar approach to destroying Western civilization and Christianity. Yeah, it does seem to be Christianity's turn to be on the chopping block at the minute, that's for sure. But all groups are ways of dividing and conquering, right? This is why the wisdom of Alan Watt is so profound and important, where he advises that only individuals can do good things and make positive change, right? As soon as you go and join some sort of group of some description, then that group is liable to be taken over, infiltrated, derailed, and so it's very risky to sign up for and try to join some sort of group or movement. Instead, going along your own path, your own course of education and development, doing what is right and resonates with you as an individual according to your skills and your creative instincts and your aptitudes, that is a better path. And if most people did that in service of the people around them in order to solve problems for other people and live a life that is less egocentric and all about me and more about how it is about me, but it's about how can I serve others and be of benefit to others and those around me, right? But the divide and conquer is pretty strong. It's a real thing, I think, and it does seem to be happening. The number of, you're just driving around, you can see in England, there's a lot of like dilapidated, old, abandoned churches that are just with roofs that are caving in, or churches that have been catered out converted into flats or business or offices, this sort of thing. But there are mosques being built, and very new, beautiful, shining, huge mosques in certain areas. I don't know of any new churches that are going up and being built. So maybe we need to get together and pull some cash and do a fundraiser and a GoFundMe and build a new church. Okay, let's review the sources for that chapter, which ESP says over on Odyssey was incredible. And I agree. That's quite an incredible 100 pages, that chapter. But sometimes it takes a while to say things that are important, doesn't it? So references and notes for that fairly epic chapter, which is a very damning indictment of the European Union. We've got Jacques Attali. Or is that, no, so the author is Laurie Adler writing about Jacques Attali, I suppose. We've got Richard J. Aldrich, who we've talked about. We've got the story from Manchester Guardian. BBC News about Nigel Farage warning of EU mass unrest. We've got a book here called European Integration and Disintegration. That sounds interesting. Richard Taylor and Robert Bidelot. That one that I mentioned at the start, The Great Deception by Christopher Booker. And somebody said as well in the chat something about Christopher Booker, right? What did you say? So Gwen was saying Christopher Booker used to have a column in the Telegraph criticizing climate change proponents. Yeah, he also has, actually. I'd never heard of this guy until recently, and I got a voucher for Christmas for Waterstones, and I got this, which is a Christopher Booker. Oh, you can't see it; it's too big. Christopher Booker, The 7 Basic Plots: Why We Tell Stories. And this book is a ridiculously thick paperback with ridiculously tiny writing on it. Look at that. But I thought it'd be a very interesting one to read at some point. It's nice to get a brand new, fresh paperback. It's got that Waterstones smell on it. So yeah, Christopher Booker, he's dead now, unfortunately. But yeah, he's a person. Anyway, references. So yeah, he did the book The Great Deception, which we had a look at. What else we got here? The Labour Party and Foreign Policy, A History by John Callaghan. Aspects of Aristocracy, David Carradine. Ron Chernow, The House of Morgan, An American Dynasty and Rise of Modern Finance. Let's see what else is standing out and looking good from this list. Yeah, the Horowitz and Collier Rockefeller's not biography, because it's about the whole family, but I suppose it is a biography, isn't it? Another one about the House of Morgan there, Social Biography of the Masters of Money by Lewis Corey. That's from 1930. I bet that one would be a well good one to get. I like the old ones. The Great European Ripoff here by David Craig and Matthew Elliott. Let's see. Yeah, the Curtis books. So Mark Curtis here, you got 3 books by him. He is RIIA. He's Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House. So that's kind of like Quigley level of scholarly work. Then we got the Morgenthau Plan, Soviet Influence on American Post-War Policy by John Dietrich. I bet that would be also an excellent one. The Stephen Dorrell book about MI6. And we've got Neil Ferguson's Rothschild 2-volume set. And it goes on. We got so many. Oh my gosh, there's like 5 pages of footnotes and books here. So I won't read through them all, but I'll get them on the screen so you can take a picture and do a screen grab if you are so inclined to do so. Yeah, there's the 20th Century Empire book we've looked at and I said would be good. And this one above it, this is Woodrow Wilson's Right Hand, The Life of Colonel House. Would also be an interesting one. Colonel House, very intriguing figure. Big mover and shaker. Woodrow Wilson's handler. Did you know that presidents have handlers? Well, they do. Or they did, and they probably still do. We've got Nigel Knight's book, Churchill, The Greatest Britain Unmasked. I really want to get that one. That's one I really want to get hold of. What else is standing out? So there's a Deborah Lavin biography of Lionel Curtis here, which is, I have looked up that one, and it's extortionately expensive. So it's probably a good one. Biography of Lionel Curtis, Deborah Lavin. Ferdinand Lundberg, America's 60 Families. This guy's got some interesting books too, actually. I haven't got any of them, but I know his name. I know of him, and these are old books, as you can see. And there's a 1941 here, Peace Aims and the New Order. And that's McKay. That would be another good one. Oh, so many good books to get. This is a problem with like buying books, is that a lot of books come with lists of other books in the back, and then you end up just wanting to get even more. All right, so here's our next page. We got our Fabian Freeway, Rose Martin, the classic one there. What else we got? Ideological Origins of the United Nations. That's Mark Mazauer. That's 2009 books, fairly recent. Jean Monnet's got a book of memoirs out, 1978. Then let's see. We've got New Culture, New Right, Michael O'Meara. This one. Inderjeet Parma, Think Tanks and Power in Foreign Policy. I looked that one up as well. Also, well, massively extortionate and expensive. Wonder why, eh? The Pilgrims of Great Britain, that would be a good one about the Pilgrim Society. And then Quigley's books, of course. Okay, and then we got a bit of info here. Yeah, David Rockefeller's memoirs, Socialist International, with those pretty crazy quotes that we read about them admitting that world government is the aim, right? And then Holly Sklar. This one, I did manage to find a copy. It's winging its way to me. Quite excited. It's about the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning for World Government. And this one here, Dan Smoot, I think that's going to be a really good one to get hold of as well. The Invisible Government, Dan Smoot, 1962. And then we got Anthony Sutton at the bottom, Wall Street and the Bolsheviks. Lovely jubbly. Last page now. A concise history of European monetary integration from EPU to EMU. Probably a dry academic account, but maybe important. And then here's one, Oliver Zunn's Philanthropy in America, a History. That might be a good one as well. That's quite recent, 2012. So, not that there's anything wrong with recent books. You know, this one was published in 2012. It's just more likely to be messed with, I think, and more likely to be mainstream and giving you an incomplete picture. And then there's some footnotes here. I'll let you take a screen grab of those. I'll just let the camera linger on them if you want to read through. I can't remember which part of the chapter they refer to. That was an epic chapter. But now that chapter 7 is done, I kept referring to it as chapter 6, didn't I? But it was chapter 7. Now that chapter 7 is done, we are on the home stretch of this book. We got 300, well, that was page 338. And let's see, how many more? Where does this book end? It ends on page, looks like 489. Thereabouts. I think that's the last chapter, isn't it? 489. So we've got about 140 pages left. It's probably going to be about another 5 videos. But I think you'll agree, those of you who have been catching a lot of these, that every part of this book is important and worthwhile and powerful and impressive and worth reading. Yes, LJ, I totally agree. You got to buy me more coffees so I can afford more books. LJ is asking, what section in Waterstones was that book in? It was in the biography section, believe it or not. So I was surprised to see it there. Or it was next to the biography section. But I was in the Manchester Waterstones, which is like 3 floors, and it's huge. I've been in there a few times, and I never knew it had a first and second floor. So I was in there quite a bit. It took me a while to decide to settle on that one in the end. But I thought it was the most bang for my buck, if you'll excuse the pun. Cool. I think that is all we got then. ESP, what a question to end the stream on. Is the Bible the same as the Quran? I don't think it is. I think they're very different. Although they are both what are called Abrahamic religions, so they have overlap. But the Quran and the Bible are 2 different books. But I haven't read the Quran, and I haven't read the Bible, so you might be better off asking someone who has. But off the top of my head, I think they're different books. Cool. All right, so I think that is it for today's broadcast. What an epic end to Chapter 7 that was. I think we've all learned something about the EU. And not that I was ever a fan of the EU. I just never cared or looked into it or thought about it too much. That chapter, I think, maybe doesn't prove, but it certainly gives you so much food for thought and insight into the true nature of the EU, where it comes from, who runs it. It's definitely not an organization which has its sovereignty provided from the ground up. If you believe that bit of nonsense on Wikipedia, then you haven't paid any attention to the last 3.5 hours, right? But yeah, wow, great stuff. I'm enjoying this very much. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know that it can get a little bit dry and boring with all these names, but you really start to see how things knit together, right? The organizations that are set up, the banking, it's really the financiers that are critical, and then recognizing that these positions in higher up in these boards and directors and presidents, etc., they have these revolving doors at the very top. They go in and out of one group to another. They always get lucrative, high salaried positions. They're living the life of Riley. And you saw the numbers about how much the EU cost, how much money is being extorted from the everyday productive members of society to sustain and perpetuate this parasitic class of do-nothings who just sit around and having meetings in fancy suits with their feet up on their high-rise buildings, jet-setting all over the EU, just making plans at the behest of the people who print and control the money, right? And they make these plans, and the rest of us get affected by it. It's gross, it's disgusting, it's despicable. But when you see it laid out like that, how it works and how the web truly looks, I don't know. To me, it feels like it has less power over me now that I've gone through that explanation and exposition of the EU. I feel like, okay, I kind of know how this works now. Like when the curtain's pulled back, and you're not just looking at the smoke and the fireworks and the booming voice and the giant like floating head, you know, the curtain gets pulled back and you see it's just a little fat man with a lot of gadgets and gizmos. It really takes the awe and the fear and the ominous kind of power out of it, and demystifies it to the point where you go, oh, it's just a bunch of lazy bureaucrats. And it is unfortunate how far along they've got with their plans and their schemes, and how much damage has been wrought in our societies and our culture. And you know, if you're Christian, how much that has been usurped and undermined, and a lot of damage has been done. But, you know, the path out of it is through your individual cultivation of your own unique gifts and talents, and your own aptitudes, and the parts. You know, no one else can be you, and that is true for everybody. So your greatest strength in this life is to be your authentic self to the best of your ability in any small way you can. Start small, start humble, and just try to do something really well to the best of your ability, and then try it again and again and again. And over time, you get better and better and better, and you improve. And then suddenly you look back and you see, wow, I can do this cool thing now. That's really nice. And other people look at you and go, whoa, it's amazing you can do that. And all you did was try a little bit each day, and you stick with it. So that's what it's all about. So that's my outgoing ending message of optimism and advice, which I hope is good. I think it's good advice. Otherwise I wouldn't say it to you. So, I think we'll wrap it there. So remember, if you feel moved at all to support the work that I'm doing here, that we are doing here, it's not just about me, it's all about people showing up and participating, then you can go to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. It's pinned at the top of the chat, so you can find it nice and easy. And then also don't forget that I have the school community devised with extra meetings and opportunities to hang out. And we've got a book club on the go, session 3 tomorrow night, reading 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, which is proving to be another very sobering read about television and the damage it's doing, and how that is also not accidental. And that was written in the 70s, and think about how much further it's come on since then. Kind of scary stuff. But I very much appreciate you all hanging out and spending time with me. Another long one tonight, but I think it was worth it. And I look forward to seeing you all, if not over on Devised for the book club, then I'll see you here again on Friday night when we start our next chapter. And that is going to be rather good, I think. So take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and stay warm, right? And until Friday or whenever, God bless.